Notre Dame fans, welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher at irishbreakdown.com. Joined today by Vince D'Addario, our football analyst. And Vince, we got some football we need to analyze today. Notre Dame, in an announcement that I was hoping we wouldn't hear, but I'm not surprised that we're hearing, Jordan Johnson, the rising sophomore receiver, has announced his intention to transfer. And we're going to talk about that, Vince, and we're going to go from it from several different ways. Well, number one, we're going to talk about it practically from a news standpoint, what this means for Notre Dame's depth chart, what this means for Notre Dame's rotation this upcoming season. And then after we dive into that, we'll talk a little bit about how it impacts recruiting, and then we can go into some of our thoughts about how this all went down, why it happened, and how it could have and should have been avoided. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So first and foremost, Vince, Notre Dame, there's going to be two responses to this. One is to absolutely lose your minds, and this is why Notre Dame's never going to win and all this other kind of stuff. The other one is to say, no big deal. They got plenty of receivers. Both responses, in my opinion, are wrong. This is
somewhere down the middle.
Right. This is a big loss, but at the same time, they do have a lot of receivers coming back. But this is more about the depth chart, not just for 2021, but the depth chart for beyond 2021. Absolutely. And that's where we're going to begin, Vince. So as we kind of start off, let's first look at what the Notre Dame depth chart and how this is going to impact what Notre Dame is going to be doing the next like I said, 2021, but also beyond 2021.
Yeah, so, it's interesting because you're right. For 2021, Notre Dame has a great depth chart, and we saw, bits and pieces of that during the Blue Gold game, right? And we know that Kevin Austin is still out because of an injury, but we saw Avery Davis. I thought he played very well. Lawrence Keys played very well. I thought we saw a lot of really good things from Braden Lenzy. Joe Wilkins was targeted a lot. He had some drops, which is a little bit concerning. But in my opinion, Joe Wilkins is a piece. He's a piece to the puzzle. He's not a guy that you want to be your go-to receiver anyway. So I'm okay with that. I'm okay with a couple of drops from him because I think he can make some plays. There's still Xavier Watts. We've seen great things from him in some of the the 3-minute clips that we've been able to get our hands on. So that has been good. He wasn't really targeted in the Blue Gold game, but I don't think that necessarily means a whole lot. And then we saw Lorenzo Styles get targeted a little bit, which really, what really benefited him was the fact that they split the rosters and they had starters and second guys together. I think he benefited from that big time. And look, again, you look at that list, there's dudes there. There's guys there that you can win with. There is no question. My issue is Jordan Johnson should have been a part of the equation, whether he was a starter, whether he was part of the rotation, whatever. He makes this group better this year, next year, and beyond. And so it's not just about 2021, because for 2021, they're going to be fine. Okay.
Well, now, I'm going to push back on that a little bit.
Well, I will say,
because what if 4 of the first 5 names on that list have in common?
They've all been injured at some point or another.
Like relatively significant injuries that have cost them multiple games. None of those guys have proven that they can stay healthy.
I will also say that while I was very happy to see what Keys and Avery Davis did, we didn't see a whole lot from the outside receiver guy. I mean, Kevin Austin, yes, okay, but you and I have talked many, many times. He's not necessarily the answer to an every down guy, right? We don't necessarily want that to be the role for him. Kevin Austin was still injured, so we didn't see what he could bring to the table. Joe Wilkins did okay, but again, I don't see him as a starter. So where are those outside receivers and who is going to take that role? Well, that could have been a prime spot for Jordan Johnson, and this could have been with Austin on the sideline this spring could have been a prime time for him to show what he has, to get on the field, period. And that didn't happen.
A couple quick things real quick as we go through this, Vince. Number one, there's a lot of questions and comments, and we will get to them all after we kind of get done talking through some of this depth chart stuff. I promise we'll get to those comments, and we'll answer your questions. Here's another thing, Vince, that let me pull that back up. Here's something else that we don't see a lot of. The issue for me is I felt like in the spring, Jordan Johnson, or not in the spring, but looking into the fall, you've got Avery Davis, slot guy, outside, smaller guy. Braden Lindsey, smaller, faster guy, not an every down player. Lawrence Keys, slot, outside guy, 170-some pounds. Not sure if he's a 70-plus snap per game guy in the future. Joe Wilkins not only had drop issues in the blue gold game, he had drop issues last year at Notre Dame.
Sure.
He's never really proven he can be a playmaker. He averages under 10 yards a catch on his career. Xavier Watts, we've never seen him really play. Jay Brunell, we've never seen him really play. And that's assuming those two guys even stay on the roster.
Yeah,
okay.
fair.
And then 3 freshmen. And as we've seen at Notre Dame, they struggle to develop freshmen.
Yep.
Even when they try to play them, they don't do much. I mean, Will Fuller had 6 catches. Kevin Austin had 5. Chase Claypool had 5. Miles Boykin had 0. I mean, I've done this before. I've gone down this list before and showed how all these players just didn't have a lot of success. And so that to me is troubling, number one. Number two, who's the big one-on-one boundary guys?
Exactly. That's what
You have a true freshman, Deion Colsey, who, again, talented player, 5-star upside guy. But he's also a raw player that played against pretty low level of competition that still needs time to develop. And as I said, we haven't seen Notre Dame show the ability to really get freshmen like him going. Then you've got Kevin Austin, who has in 3 years has 6 career catches. He has more, he's been suspended for a full year because of off the field stuff. He has missed most of last year with an injury. He's broken that same foot twice, I believe.
That's the concerning part
at least.
For me, yeah.
And so again, who's your boundary guy? And that's my issue beyond just the some of the stuff that we'll get into about how this happened and why this happened. Practically speaking, if you're going to say they're going to be fine, you better at least be willing to engage in the fact that the depth chart does not look great in regards to doing the things that this offense has proven that it needs in the offense. The only time we've seen this offense flourish without a taller, bigger one-on-one guy in the boundary is when they had a guy that ran a 4.32. And they also were able to run the ball for over 200 yards a game that year. That was 2015 with Will Fuller. They had Mike McGlinchey at right tackle, Ronnie Stanley left tackle, Quentin Nelson at left guard, Alex Barnes at right guard, and Sam Musford at center. They had Steve Elmer at right guard, Nick Martin at center that year. Well, 4 of those 5 guys are NFL starters right now. The other one probably would have been if he'd have stayed with football.
Right. Yeah.
So practically speaking, that's my concern. That's sort of my pushback to the notion of, they're going to be fine is based on what? They're going to be fine based on Kevin Austin. Look, if Kevin Austin comes back healthy, if Braden Lindsey is able to stay healthy, if Lawrence Keys can stay healthy, if Joe Wilkins can get over his drops and make more plays like he did at the beginning of the game and not what he did after that, and they can develop Deion Colsey and Lawrence Styles is as good as advertised, sure, they're going to be fine. But that's a lot of ifs.
That's a lot of ifs.
And so practically speaking, that's my concern. And to the notion of, they're going to be fine. I hate that response whenever a kid transfers, whether I agree with the transfer or not, or understand where it came from. Don't you think you'd be better off if you're Notre Dame with this list of players and Jordan Johnson?
Right, exactly. He elevates whatever group he's with. When whatever school he lands in, he's going to elevate the wide receiver room, period, just from his skill standpoint. He's a 5-star.
Right.
Was he the 28th overall? Is that the number that I remember
Now,
seeing?
I didn't grade him as a 5-star. I had him as a top 50 guy, more in that 45 to 55 range. But still, a guy like that should have caught 5 or 6 balls as a freshman. That's just a fact. A guy like that should at least be getting the rotation. Now, there's blame to go all around for why he didn't get it. But the fact is, practically speaking, this is a loss. And even if Jordan Johnson's only, let's say he was overrated and not really a 5-star or a top 50 guy. Let's say he was just a top 150 guy. Okay. That's still a loss.
Sure.
Because he's still a good football player. He's also a player that provides a unique skill set that a lot of your guys don't have. Jordan Johnson is a completely different player than Braden Lindsey, Lawrence Keys, Xavier Watts, Lorenzo Styles. I mean, all those guys Avery Davis, all those guys you're looking at, the only guys that are kind of similar to him style of play-wise are Joe Wilkins, who's a solid player, but that's it, and Kevin Austin, who incredibly talented but injury-prone. So, yes, If Kevin Austin can come back and stay healthy, if Xavier Watts doesn't transfer, and if they start to actually develop him instead of doing with him what they did with Jordan Johnson, if Lindsey can be healthy, if Keys can be healthy, if If Styles is as good as advertised, if Wilkins can be solid, if Avery Davis is going to make the jump I think he's going to make, in 2021 they're going to be fine. But here's where it gets tricky, Vince. The asterisk by those 4 players' names is that's because those are all 5th years for those guys.
Right.
And when was the last time you saw a coaching staff bring back 4 or even 3 5th-year skill players at a position? You just don't see that at skill players. You rarely see that along the offensive line. And my concern is the other part, and Brian Kelly has made this clear over the years, and he is 100% correct on this. The coaching staff only has so much of a say in who comes back for a 5th year.
Right.
They can say, hey, we want you back, but if the school says no, and when you look at a guy like Kevin Austin, for example, that's going to be really shaky in regards to whether or not the school is going to let him come back for a 5th year. And the other part of it is will all those guys want to come back for a 5th year? So let's just say 2 of those guys come back. You're looking at 7 wide receivers. That's assuming Jay Brunell or Xavier Watts doesn't transfer. If one of those guys transfers, now you're talking about 6 wide receivers, and then whatever freshmen come in. And again, rinse and repeat in regards to the inability of this coaching staff to really get freshmen ready to play. And then you come back and let's say it's some 2 of, let's say it's Wilkins and 1 of Keys, Lindsey, or Austin. And those are players that have proven to have a hard time staying healthy. And if one of those guys goes down, now where are you? Right. And we're not talking in 3 years. We're talking about 2022.
Which is when the schedule gets much more
Jordan
difficult.
Johnson would have been a junior, so he would have been hitting that sweet spot for Notre Dame where that 3rd year where those guys tend to start really taking jumps as players. So, look, this is problematic. And if your response is, well, that's okay, go get C.J. Williams and Tobias Merriweather and Xavier Bradshaw. Oh, yeah, it's great. I mean, it's a great receiving core. But let's consider 2 things. Number one, what do you think the odds are that they get all 3 of those guys right now?
0.
Right? Number 2, what are the odds that all those guys are ready to play and contribute as true freshmen? Right? If Jordan Johnson couldn't do it as a true freshman, why are we assuming that those guys are going to come in as true freshmen and contribute?
Speaking of recruiting, don't guys who are being recruited look at how freshmen are used and how? I mean, do you think any of them are going to reach out to Jordan Johnson and be like, "Hey, man"?
And we'll get in. Let's get into that here in a second, Vince. I just because that's going to take us down a rabbit hole that we will get down. But I just think, practically speaking, this puts Notre Dame in a risky situation. There's a chance they could be just fine because again, Chip Long and did a really good job of bringing in talented wide receivers. I mean, they did. It's just there's been some issues in regards to those guys staying healthy, and that's really my big problem. Vince, if Austin, Lindsey, and Keys, here's 2 things to look at it. If they had no history of getting injured, I would not be concerned about this transfer in 2021. I wouldn't. Having said that, if those guys didn't have a history of getting injured, we would not be talking about them possibly coming back in 2022, and Notre Dame would be really screwed.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's a tough situation in regards to just simply saying, hey, this is terrible. He was their most talented player. That's debatable. That's very debatable, in my opinion. And I've said in the past that I thought Xavier Watts had a higher ceiling in that class alone, but we don't know if he's going to stay.
Yeah.
We don't know if Jay Brunell is going to stay. So the numbers are getting shaky. Kevin Austin's a guy that, to me, had a higher grade coming out of high school than he did as well. And I would argue that Deion Colsey is not as polished as Lawrence Keys or Jordan Johnson was coming out of high school, but I think Deion has a higher ceiling just because of his size and his unique athleticism. I think Deion has a lot more explosive potential with Jordan. Jordan was an explosive athlete. He was more of a precise route runner and, catch the one-on-ones and those kind of things. He was not a dynamic athlete in the way that like a Braden Lindsey or Lawrence Keys was. He was a different kind of player. So I do think this presents some problematic areas for the depth chart. And as you and I have said a lot of times, Vince, as a coach, when you're going into a season with a lot of ifs, that gets concerning. And to me, that's where Notre Dame is. On one hand, we agree, right, Vince? A lot of talent. On the other hand,
absolutely.
I could put an asterisk by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 7 of those guys. I could put an asterisk besides either injury history, inexperience, or may not even be here in the fall. And that's where I view it as being a problematic issue.
Well, it's all an issue. And, when you put it out there like this with the 5th years and, the eligibility remaining. And frankly, we don't know, as far as in a gold helmet, we don't know a lot about a lot of these kids, right? I mean, because we haven't had an opportunity to see them. They haven't been counted on. in this wide receiving core. And of course, Jordan Johnson would have also fallen in that category. But no matter how you slice it, having him on this list makes this group better, period. So again, if those ifs are answered as yeses, then yeah,
they'll be fine.
They're going to be fine this year.
No
question. I'm more worried about next year and moving forward after that.
But here's the other thing, Vince. If they're fine this year, that increases the odds that they're not going to be fine in 2022. Because if Braden Lindsey goes out there and has a healthy year and has like 40 catches for 700, 800 yards and proves to be a big player, do you want to risk coming back and having another injury-riddled season, or do you want to take your shot knowing that, hey, I'm going to test well, I'm going to put up a real fast 40 time and that kind of stuff? Same thing with Kevin Austin. If Kevin Austin is healthy and he comes out and he is Notre Dame's number one receiver, which I think we can all say is possible, I would argue, I don't know your stance on this, Vince. I don't know. We actually haven't talked about this, I don't believe. I think Kevin Austin is their most God-given talented receiver, assuming he's 100% healthy again. Right. I think he's their most physical, the combination of size, ball skills, and athleticism. If he's back 100%, he's really good. Sure. Is there any chance in heck that if Kevin Austin catches more than 40 passes this year, he comes back for a fifth year?
No way.
I don't see it.
He's so injury prone that why would you take that chance?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So it does get problematic. So I view it as again, we're just talking practically. We're not talking about whether this should or shouldn't have happened. We're just trying to have an honest conversation about it. And if you can't accept that, then you have to accept the fact that you're just not willing to be objective and you're just going to defend the staff no matter what happens.
Sure.
If you can't accept the fact that, there's reasons for this beyond, that Notre Dame is talented and he did have to battle, then you're just being unnecessarily negative. We have to have a practical conversation about this. And that's the issue. So that's the practical part of this conversation. Let's get to the part that I know you've been wanting to talk about the entire time. And just the Vince, to me, this is problematic in a lot of ways. Let's just put all the cards out on the table.
All right.
Are there things that Jordan Johnson could and should have done differently? Absolutely.
Probably yes.
Absolutely. And just from things I've been told, there's some things, but the things that I have been told are typical freshman issues.
Okay.
That were blown up for him that honestly weren't blown up for some other guys. And that's my issue is I have heard some stories about guys who are now in the NFL that played for years. And it's like, well, that's not as bad as what Jordan Johnson did. And Jordan Johnson's been in Brian Kelly's doghouse.
Right.
So to me, that's an issue. Number one is just the stubbornness to develop a younger player. If Notre Dame had the same approach on offense that they have on defense, when you look at, like, for example, how Mike Elson has developed younger players, I've heard stories about how younger players have gone to Mike Elson frustrated about their playing time. The manner in which he handles those conversations, it's like, okay, I get it now, coach. I'm gonna keep working. That's not happening on the offensive side of the ball.
Right.
And it's not Elson's response isn't, okay, we're gonna play you because you're pissed. That's not how his response is. But there's a trust there because those guys are at his house all the time, or at least they were until this COVID stuff happened, But you have to look in the mirror and say, why is this continuing to be a problem throughout your tenure? And I don't blame Tommy Rees. I blame Del Alexander to a degree, but this has been going on for a while.
Well,
and now that the transfer portal is what it is, where guys can just leave and go right away, there's a risk that this could happen more. Because when you have a young, talented player like this, you have to look, the reality is, Vince, you know this. Notre Dame fans who want to talk about traits and they want to accept Brian Kelly's version of this, because right now that's the only version we have. And that's the thing that I think pisses me off about college football players is they can't come out and say, hey, this is what's going on. Because then it's classless and it's what. But a 58-year-old head coach can constantly talk a player down. Traits. And every time it's like Brian Kelly just had this like disdain for ever talking about Jordan Johnson. And honestly, I don't think it had anything to do with Jordan Johnson. I don't think this is a personal issue with Jordan Johnson. I don't. I think this is just another long line of Kelly being stubborn with how the offense is run and wanting more veteran players. And you have to know the whole route tree and all these other types of things. I think the issue is he got sick of us talking about it. And so his by coming after us, he was in turn talking down Jordan. And if you're I want everybody to do this. Put yourselves back in your 18, 19-year-old selves. And every time the head football coach goes on an interview and he's talking to thousands, if not tens of thousands of people, he has something negative to say about you. He's questioning your work ethic. He's questioning your focus. He's questioning your character, which is what traits are. What are traits if not character? Right?
Absolutely.
And it's never, hey, look, we think Jordan can be a star here, but he's got to grow up and he's got to – I think he'd be more willing, but there was never that. He's like, yeah, he's a good player. He's come along, but let me say these negative things. There was never the comments that we saw from other players, and I don't think it was a personal issue with Jordan as much as it was Brian Kelly getting frustrated with us that we kept talking about it. But that's our job, and he needs to get over that because he's a grown man and he makes millions of dollars. That's part of our job, is to ask you why one of your most three talented players gets fewer targets in a spring game than some of your walk-ons. And it was obvious that he was done. I mean, it was you don't transfer 2 days after the blue gold game and you weren't thinking about it all spring. So this has been festering for a while, Vince.
For sure.
That's part of what makes me so frustrated.
I mean, the frustration for me is twofold. Number one, if you say it wasn't personal towards Jordan Johnson, it may not have been.
I'm assuming. I'm just giving the benefit of the doubt.
To me, it felt that way.
Yes,
like it felt like, I don't want to say there was a vendetta or he had like this preconceived
the doghouse
idea.
He was clearly in Kelly's doghouse.
Clearly in the doghouse for whatever reason. Clearly in the doghouse. So that's number one. And with everything that you've heard, and there was no practical reason that we are aware of that he should have been in the doghouse. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then the second thing would be the stubbornness not to play young kids in general on the offensive side, and that's a bigger picture problem, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's more a receiver. And I think we need to say that.
That's fair. That's fair because you're
right.
But
again, the pushback on that is those guys tend to be anomalies. I mean, Michael Mayer played. Okay, what other freshman wide receiver played? Alize Mack. That's it. Tyler Eifert wasn't playing as a redshirt freshman until Kyle Rudolph got hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, so this has been an issue for quite some time.
It's absolutely,
but it's even more of an issue at wide receiver.
And that's my more bigger picture philosophical type question is, you're not going to play these young guys. It's clear that the young guys are leaving because of this situation, whether it's they have a problem with it, whatever. P-Dub had a comment that I want to put up here because this is the direction that I'm going with this. If you were a parent of a top recruit that it's a wide receiver, would you even entertain a call from Notre Dame on the offensive side? I wouldn't. Now, I'm closer to the situation than most parents of recruits, right? But Notre Dame doesn't play freshman wide receivers. And if I think I've got a 5-star wide receiver, if I think I've got a highly ranked wide receiver sleeping upstairs in my house, I don't know that I'm going after a Notre Dame offer, to be honest with you. Now, I'll go get the offer because it'll boost my everything, it'll boost my rating and blah, 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 blah. But I don't know that I ever seriously consider sending my kid to Notre Dame if it's a solely a football decision. Okay. If it was me personally, of course, I'm thinking about the education, et cetera. So I don't want people to think that I'm not thinking about that. But if I want my kid to play and I want him to be a part of a good program, et cetera, I don't know that Notre Dame makes the short list. I'm being honest.
I think they'll still make the short list because they're Notre Dame. But I think this is one of the things that is continued to hurt Notre Dame when it comes to wide receiver recruiting. It does. I mean, you can deny it all you want. You can say no, but look, there's a long history of this. And if Brian Kelly is annoyed with us for saying it publicly, like people in the media, does he really think that Clemson's coaching staff isn't saying this, that Ohio State's coaching staff, USC's coaching staff, every coaching staff in the country has a history of getting freshmen ready to play. And not even just like, the Justin Rosses who are freaky talents, but look what Clemson did this year with EJ Williams. Right. I'm sorry, EJ Williams is not a more talented player than Jordan Johnson. He just was given an opportunity to make plays. You say, well, your opportunities are earned in practice. That is such the lamest thing that I've ever heard, because that is only true to a point. You can have guys, coaches have to decide who plays. I mean, that's the fact of it. But the other part of it is look, go ask anyone that played under Lou Holtz about some of fans' all-time favorite players. And what you're going to find is they had to hold that guy's hand every day, make sure he went to class, make sure he wasn't doing this. Some of the stories I've heard over the years, And it's just like, no, you don't want to have a team full of those guys, but you're going to have some of those guys.
I get it. Believe
the other problem is that Kelly and the staff have chosen to play some of those guys in the past. And then for some reason that the other guys, they won't do it. And I think that lack of consistency in how they address that to me is problematic, because it's like, well, you're telling me to do this or I'm not going to play, but so-and-so's is doing the same things I'm doing and worse. Right. And you're playing him and he's a starter and one of your star players. I think that lack of consistency from a messaging standpoint is also why there appears to be a lack of trust with some of the younger players. And that exists. I'm telling you, I talk to a lot of people, that exists. Sure. That is the problem. And Tommy Rees can only do so much to smooth it over. And the assistant coaches can only do so much to smooth it over before things like this start to happen. And I think that this is domino number one when we look at the transfer portal situation, is that this is something that I'm concerned is going to happen more frequently.
Well,
because kids can now leave. And here's the other unique thing about Jordan Johnson, Vince. He's basically still a freshman because this past year didn't count.
Because of COVID year.
So he's even more attractive to college teams because he still has four. Actually, technically, I think it's actually 5. If he gets injured, he can still have another redshirt season.
That's true.
So this is a kid. You're basically treating Jordan Johnson like he's a 2021 recruit that got a year of seasoning at Notre Dame. That's essentially how he's going to be looked at, and that's how Notre Dame should have looked at him.
That's a coveted recruit. He's a coveted guy right now, and that's the problem with this transfer portal nonsense, is that having to sit out a year used to be a deterrent from going into the portal. It was, okay, I'm not playing, I'm frustrated, but I don't want to go into the transfer portal and have to guarantee to sit for a whole other year. So I'll stick around, I'll figure it out, I'll make it happen. And so that's the problem with the trend. Now it's with kids these days, and I know I'm going to sound like the old man in my rocking chair on the thing, telling kids to stop trampling my roses. But that's the thing with kids these days, is they always look for the easy way out. This generation, I'm generalizing. I get that, but people look for the easy way out when things get tough, and now you're allowing that to happen, and kids are going to take it.
And you're being very broad with it, and that's part of my issue that I've pushed back against the transfer portal because. And I've seen this firsthand. Because I coached at a level where you didn't have to sit out to transfer. The Division III level, you don't have to sit out a year.
Gotcha.
And I've had kids come back, Coach, I wish I wouldn't have done this. And, it's just – and I've talked to former Notre Dame players who are like, yeah, I was about to leave after my freshman year, but I didn't want to sit out a year. So I stuck it out, and then I ends up being an NFL player because a lot of 18-year-olds have those kind of issues. And part of the issue that I have with the Notre Dame program right now is there's too much put on the players to have to conform at a young age. That's part of development. And this is why I've pointed to other players that their coaches do kind of kick them in the butt and take them under their wing and let them know that they care about them. And I just think that's a bit more of an issue at receiver than it is at some other positions. And that to me is something that I believe to be problematic. And I think that's why certain positions are gonna potentially see more transfers than others, because if you feel like your coach has your back, like I know of a player right now that's contemplating transferring, and a big part of it is because he just doesn't know when he goes to talk to his coach, if he's going to get a straight answer. I know of another player. I know a parent of another player who's a veteran now, who wanted to transfer after his freshman year, went to talk to his position coach, and the coach told him some things, but he felt like, you know what, coach always shoots me straight, and I trust him. I'm going to stick it out, and that guy is playing now, and he's a key part of what they're trying to do. So that relationship, that trust thing, is very important to this. And if you don't realize that, then you've never been in a locker room. And look, I transferred after my freshman year for that exact reason. You promised me one thing when I was being recruited, and then it took 4 days for you to break your promise. How can I ever trust you again? And so, see you later. I'm out of here. And so I think that's the thing about this, Vince, is this is going to, from a recruiting standpoint, it could hurt them. Now, people are going to say, well, hey, this opens up another scholarship. Well, again, for who? That's the problem. If you say, hey, we're going to get C.J. Williams and Tobias Merriweather and Xavier Bradshaw, great, that's phenomenal. But are they going to leave too if they don't play as freshmen? That you go, you know what I mean? Just as excited as you are about those new recruits as how excited you were when Jordan Johnson signed.
Absolutely.
No, Lorenzo Styles is going to play a ton. That's fine. We'll see. We'll see about that. I hope he does. But again, Lorenzo Styles and Jordan Johnson are different players. They don't do the same things. So I just, and there's a lot of these people that we're getting these responses, right? And then these responses, it's not a good thing for the kids. Anyone that's ever been around football knows this is not good for young people. It's not. And let's just say this. Let's say Jordan Johnson transfers to a Power 5 program, and the coaches promise him playing time, and he steps on campus and he starts right away. Yeah, that's good for Jordan Johnson. You know what it's not good for? The 5 kids that spent the last 3 years working their butts off to try to get an opportunity, and all of a sudden this transfer comes in and he's handed a job, right? This isn't good for kids. I get tired of hearing that as well, but that's a different topic for a different day. Let's stay on Jordan Johnson. I look at this, Vince, and I say, listen, I think there's fault to go all around on this. I think there's certain things that Jordan Johnson, as an 18 and 19-year-old, should have done better. And when he looks back on this in 5 years, he's going to say, yeah, you know what? I should have done this differently. I should have done that differently. If Jordan Johnson's the young man that I know him to be, he's going to have those moments where he may already have them. He may already be kind of looking at like, I wish I'd have done this differently, but he also realizes, coach isn't getting past that. They're just not going to get past that. I don't believe that they're going to get past that, so I'm going to go somewhere else. Maybe he doesn't realize it yet, but he will down the road. But at the same time, you have a lot of adults in this building that need to understand that if you want to win a championship, there's going to be players like Jordan Johnson that you kind of have to pay a little bit more attention to than others. That's just a fact. And some of the greatest players to ever play at Notre Dame in the last 30, 40 years were exactly that same kind of player. But the coaches that developed those players understood that it shouldn't be always about the 18-year-olds having to do all the moving towards what I'm doing. Sometimes it's me having to put my arm around a kid and say, hey, man, we're going to do this together. And sometimes that means encouragement. Sometimes that means me putting my foot up as behind. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But at the same time, when you tell a kid, well, you're not playing because of traits, you've said this in the past before, Vince, you've now removed the carrot from the conversation, and all you're giving them is the stick. Right? It's like, well, you're not going to play. Well, okay, well now, so I'm not playing. So now what am I going to do? So it's kind of like, hey, we're gonna get you focused because hey, look, if we're gonna throw you out there and you keep this going, here's what you got to do. And they don't do that. It's just at some positions they just say, hey, look, we're moving on, and that to me is really frustrating.
Well, and from a specific Jordan Johnson point of view, if I'm in his shoes, I'm leaving too. There's no question with the rules the way they're set up. With the ability to play right away, I'm out. I would leave. I would leave too, because look, kids listen to what the head coach says in the media.
Yeah.
They know who, well, for the most part, I should say, they know who's better than who on the roster, and they know if they should be playing over certain people. Now, some kids have a clouded view of their talent level. Of course they do. Okay, but with everything that was stacked up against Jordan Johnson at this point, I would have done the exact same thing. And I thought his little statement that he put out was classy. It was the right thing to do. But you're right. The fact that it happened 2 days after the Blue Gold game was no surprise. That means that he had this thing in a holster, ready to go.
And it tells me they didn't want to keep him.
And I don't blame him. Well, and that's a really good point. If I'm a head coach and I realize that one of my potential stud players is going to leave, I'm going to try to recruit him to come back. Like, I want him to stay in the fold, and this never even gets out, right?
Right.
And that clearly
it seems like
happen.
The only time they've done that is when it's at a position where they're thin on numbers.
Yeah.
More so than it being individual players.
Sure.
And to me, that's problematic. So,
yeah.
And look, if you don't think that, as we mentioned before, that Dabo Sweeney and Ryan Day and Lincoln Riley and Clay Helton and every other coach in America is, Mario Cristobal, all those coaches are going to not be pointing this out to recruits they're battling Notre Dame for at receiver,
right?
You're kidding yourself. I want to go through these comments, Vince, because it's a wide array of comments.
It's like the Wild West over here.
Very interesting, but I like the fact that there's a lot of difference of opinion, and we're going to try to get to these all. Robert Didoff, this is a killer. However, I barely saw him on the field during the spring game. Hopefully the depth chart is there this year to rebound. I think we addressed that, Robert.
Yep.
Just because he wasn't on the field doesn't mean he can't play. I mean, we rarely saw Kyron Williams in 2019. So I'll point to this. Are you telling me that Kyron Williams went from a guy that only deserved 4 carries for an entire season, a season in which they had running back depth problems all year, to all of a sudden he's a 1,000-yard rusher with 35 catches. A year later, he made that big of a jump. Right. Come on. No, it's about you have to be given the opportunity. And when most guys do, they take advantage of it. Jamel Chamberlain in Notre Dame continues to play not to play young receiver. What is the issue? Is it coaching, preparation? Other programs get kids some reps and some opportunities, but Notre Dame refuses. This may hurt recruiting in the long run. So I want to address a couple of these comments from Jamel because I think he's on to a couple things. I think there's a couple issues as to why. Because we can say, hey, freshmen don't play at Notre Dame. Well, why? There's a couple reasons for that. Number one is you have to set what your standard is going to be for guys to play. And most good coaches set a standard based on on what the expectations should be for a player. So if you have a senior who is half the time doesn't know the routes, doesn't know the plays, odds are you're not going to play him because you're a senior. When you have a freshman that's that way, you say, okay, I don't expect him to know everything that Javon McKinley knows, but he's a very talented kid. He does these three things real well. We're going to get him those opportunities. That's what most teams do. That's what Clemson did with E.J. Williams early in the season this past year, and it paid off for him because by the end of the year, E.J. Williams was playing much better, had two great plays in the ACC championship game against Notre Dame.
And let me add this too, Brian. Mm-hmm. When you have the possibility of playing, okay, so Clemson plays their freshman wide receiver, right? So there is that possibility. You might not play this game, but you might play this game. There's that possibility of playing. What I've noticed with kids is they're more focused off the field when they know that there's going to be an opportunity to get on the field. So all these kids that we're talking about have issues off the field and they're not focused and blah, 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 blah. If you have an opportunity to play, sometimes that goes away.
Right.
I'm just saying when you have a chance to play, you tend to be a little bit more responsible with the things that you're doing away from the team.
Here's the other part, Vince, to this. I've addressed this for years. The fact of the matter is when guys are on scout team, and I know for a fact that Jordan Johnson was on scout team for at least half the year, they don't get coached on offense. They just don't. They're not in the meetings with the varsity players. It was even worse this year from what I'm told by several people because of COVID rules. You had to have even fewer players in meetings. They're not getting, other than individual periods, they're getting no coaching from the position coach. It's mostly working with graduate assistants, and it's running the other team's offense. So that's the other thing is there is no development, and that's a problem. That's a problem. And look, we've all been there as coaches. I know, especially I have as a coach, is look, this kid's not ready to help me yet, but I think this kid has potential. So what do? You make sure he's by your veteran players. I can't tell how many times I've had conversations with my veterans. Hey, look, man, I need you to take so-and-so under your wing because that guy can help us. You know what I mean? And and that's part of your legacy is that guy coming in and looking at you and pointing to you saying, hey, I'm here because of so-and-so. But then also making the time to step in and say, hey, look, man, you want to play? Here's what you got to do. And if, meet me here. Meet me after practice. Meet me, do this, do that, those kind of things. And so that's part of development that the guys aren't getting. And the other part of this, too, is the schematic problem in which you look at what the expectation is of a Notre Dame receiver has to have a lot on his plate. He just does. And we've heard Notre Dame, and this isn't just coming from me and my sources. Go listen to a Notre Dame receiver get interviewed when they ask him about his freshman year. And just the look on their faces is like, oh, man, the playbook. Go listen to Joe Wilkins' interview last year after the Duke game, if you don't believe me. And listen to what he said about how difficult it was to consume the entire playbook and how, as a freshman, he was expected to know it all. And because he didn't say it like this. He didn't say the last part, like, because I didn't know it, I didn't play. That's just what happened.
Well, they won't say that. They're not going to,
because these kids are too respectful and too classy. Just like Jordan Johnson did not say what I'm sure because he didn't say why he's transferring. He just thanked everybody for the opportunity. Well, if it was all wonderful and he loves everyone, then he would still be at Notre Dame. But he's too respectful, and most kids are, because they know that there's nothing that's good going to come. Because if Brian Kelly goes out there and rips Jordan Johnson, fans are like, yeah, that's coaching. Jordan Johnson goes out there and criticizes Brian Kelly. What an immature kid. He's just a punk. Good. He should be gone. Sadly, that's how it is. The expectation is higher on the 18-year-old than it is for the 58-year-old head coach. That's just the reality with sports. And that's true of any fan base in a lot of areas. So, Jamel, that's kind of the issue for me is it's more of a receiver-specific problem because receivers have to do so much than a running back. But we've seen a bit of this issue at times in the past with running backs as well. Josh Adams does not play much in 2015 if it's not for injuries. I mean, he barely played after the Texas game, when Torian Folsom went down, they just gave CJ Prosise all the time. I remember the USC game. Josh Adams comes in, rips off a 26-yard run, and it's his only carry of the game. Remember that, Vince, in 2015?
Yep.
So that's an issue. Beer Belly says, I don't blame him if coaches won't play him to go to another team and be their star. He will be missed. Agree. Again, here's and this is the counter to that. Jay says, I honestly think Styles will make a bigger impact as a freshman than Jordan Johnson would have as a sophomore this year. Just my opinion. The writing has been on the wall since last year. Isn't that a problem, though, Jay? The fact that the writing has been on the wall and there's nothing this kid is going to be able to do to get out of it, that's a problem for me. The fact that the writing has been on the wall for a kid since his first semester in college, that's a problem. This kid wasn't an early enrollee. This was a problem. If you're telling me that the writing has been on the wall since his first semester in college, that is not a Jordan Johnson problem. I'm sorry. Donald Richardson says some kids don't have patience anymore. They want to be the main guy on the field. I get it, but your time will come faster than he thinks. They got to get some young athletes on the field if they are ready, though. I think it's kind of a little bit of both, Donald. I think that there is a notion that kids aren't patient, and that's partly why Vince and I don't like this transfer rule, because it removes – so what happens is the transfer rule, by forcing guys to sit out a year, removes emotion from these decisions.
Correct. Because you have to
really think about it. Now there's that you can make as many emotional decisions as you want. And as adults, we need to be able to say, hey, look, I've been there. I transferred after my freshman year. I didn't have the kind of, the force of, hey, you in transfer, you have to sit out a year, and so it's not a good thing. And I think kids are impatient, and this is going to create a lot more transferring, and that's going to create a lot more regret and a lot more problems and a lot more recruiting of players that are on other teams. If you don't think that coaches at Alabama, or I shouldn't say Alabama because I don't know this. That's unfair of me to say Alabama specifically. If you don't think there aren't coaches at other programs that have been calling for the last 6 months, Jordan Johnson's high school coaches or friends or former teammates, and saying, hey, or if they have players on their team that played 7-on-7 with Jordan or went to camps with Jordan or know Jordan, say, hey, let your boy know he come here and we're going to get him. Yeah, that's going to happen even more and more now that there's the transfer rule. Yep. But at the same time, Donald also, I think this is a very fair comment, Vince, because he also says, look, they got to get some young guys on the field. And I think it's the job of the coaches to say, hey, look, this kid is talented. It's your job to push him. And I think I've told this story before, Vince. In 2002, I was coaching running backs, and our fullback issue was problematic. We didn't have great talent at fullback, and we were a two-back team. And so the head coach and the offensive coordinator said to me, we had a linebacker that was really, really athletic. And he was like 230 pounds, but he wasn't real instinctive as a linebacker. You know what I mean? And so they said, look, it's your job to get this kid ready to play. And then we took one of our running backs and said, we're going to cross-train him at running back. And the coaches said to me, if they're not ready to play, that's on you. So you better do what you got to do to get these guys ready to play. And that, to me, is what should have happened here, is Brian Kelly should have said, hey, I know Jordan's a knucklehead, and he's not doing what he needs to do, but it's up to you to make sure he does it. And if he doesn't do it, and I know for a fact that this is how Urban Meyer runs his program. I know this for a fact. If he's not going to class and if he's not developing and he's not ready to play on Saturday, that's your fault, not his. That's what head coaches say. Most head coaches will say but when your program is not, when you don't really care as much about forcing the issue with younger talented players, then you're going to get what we see at Notre Dame. Brandon looks at this, Vince, and he looks at it from a recruiting standpoint. Hopefully we can now take 4 receivers, Bradshaw, Merriweather, Williams, and Walker. Yeah, that sounds good, Brandon, but I mean, do you think Notre Dame leads for all 4 of those guys right now? I don't. I think they lead for one of them, but not all 4 of them. But even then, let's say they get all 4 of those guys. Who's to say they're not going to have to suffer through the same thing that Jordan Johnson went through? That's kind of where I look at it. Here's again 2 different opinions, Vince. Jacob says, I love how our walk-on Salerno can get PT and get the ball thrown his way, but former 5-star can't sniff the field for 2 years or get any opportunity. It's baffling. And then, of course, Searcher Green has the opposite. We will see if the problem was with JJ or Notre Dame. We see what he becomes on another staff, if he becomes a first-round pick. And then he had another comment, that kind of similar thing. So, again, all types of different views on this. Michael Morris, I've talked to some of the players, and I have read that Jordan was the best wide receiver on the team. Do you believe he has gotten a fair shot? I don't believe that, and I've heard the same things that Michael has. There are people on the team that have said to me, like, that's our most talented dude.
Right.
Like, he's the most talented dude they have.
Well, and there was another one in here to refute that one was Jordan had off the field issue. He skipped some practices.
No, he didn't.
So I wanted to throw that out there.
No, he didn't.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see if we got some more. All right, here we go. Kelly has always been great at taking 3-4-star kids and building them up. It seems like the majority of 5-star skill players he gets either don't reach their full potential or don't pan out. Well, see, part of that, Sean, too, is because
you still have to develop a 5-star kid.
But it's what a kid's expectation is, right? And that's the thing.
That's true.
Adi Takumba Ogundiji is going to be a lot more patient by not playing for 2 years than Dalen Hayes would have been. Or, pick a highly ranked player. That's just the thing is like, look, I was recruited by so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so, and, they're all telling me I'm going to play, and then I get here and you're not playing me. That's human nature. That's how I was as a freshman. Look, I started as a true freshman and transferred, right? So, I mean, there's a lot that goes into transferring, and the fact is when you're a highly ranked guy, there's a level of expectation that you're going to get your opportunity, and if they didn't want to play him in the fall, because, look, there are legitimate reasons that we could have a conversation about why they didn't play him in the fall that I would accept, Vince. It was a COVID year. Mm-hmm. It was it was one of those years we're all trying to figure out how to handle this.
Sure.
And it was a situation where, like, look, we just felt like we needed to play our veterans to get out of these games with wins and just survive the season. Okay, cool. You know what? I would actually
you didn't have a spring.
That.
You didn't have, and you didn't know if practice was going to get canceled.
Right.
Like if you devoted entire practice to younger guys and then practice gets canceled because of COVID.
Right.
Now
we saw that Notre Dame had a game canceled.
I get that.
They were supposed to play Wake Forest twice last year.
Sure. I get that. I totally would be able to stomach that excuse. I get that.
But then when you get to the spring, the way that's the time when you force feed the issue. And my thing is they did that with the offensive linemen. They've done. I mean, Brian Kelly talked about how that he told his coaches, I want to make sure that these early enrollees get extra playing time because we need to make sure we develop them. Well, why aren't you doing that with Xavier Watts and Jordan Johnson on offense? Why is that only happening on defense? Yeah. It's mind-boggling. Some of the stuff Brian Kelly says, I'm like, I don't see how people can just soak it all in and be like, yep. Oh, yep. There's so much contradictory things in there. Yep. Like, hey, guess what? This is Jordan Johnson's first spring too.
Yeah.
Right? Not just Ryan Barnes and Philip Riley and Justin Walters. This is Jordan Johnson's first spring. Xavier Watts had one whole spring practice last year. Looked pretty good at it too. So it's just kind of frustrating. Thomas Kemp for me probably has my favorite because he gave me a glass half full and a glass half empty comment all in one. This is beautiful, Vince.
I like that.
Glass half full. It does leave room for Deion Colzie and Lorenzo Styles fill in until ultimately they also aren't developed by Dell and PK and leave.
Exactly.
That is wonderful. Look, I think it's a little different scenario with every kid's different. I mean, that's why not every kid that didn't play as a freshman left. Jordan Johnson left because his expectation was different than it was for a lot of other kids that came to Notre Dame. And he came to Notre Dame. Academics were important to him. I've met his mother. Trust me, academics were important to him, especially his mom. He just needed he had some growing up to do. And not in bad ways. Just he had some. Look,
we all did.
Yes.
Believe me.
Yeah, but it's also, but he came to Notre Dame also, a big part of it was football. And the fact is football wasn't working out for him. But as a big-time recruit, he understands, hey, I can go to so-and-so and I can play for so-and-so. And every team has transfers. I mean, Ohio State just lost a kid that caught some passes for him last year as a freshman. Jamison Williams just transferred to Alabama. So this kind of thing is going to happen, but Notre Dame can't afford – Alabama and Ohio State can afford to lose a big-time receiver and be fine. I don't think Notre Dame is as much in that type of situation. Let's see here.
There was a comment in here.
This is a great comment from the Fifth Horseman. Yes, we need y'all to give us a like, hit the subscription bell or button, and also the notification bell to make sure that you're getting notified of all of our. Here we go. Here's the other one from Searcher Green. Depth chart shouldn't change. He didn't seem to be in it. Yeah, we get that, right? That's the problem. That's the problem. He should have been in it. They should have force fed the issue with him. Like they did, like Brian Kelly. This isn't my opinion. This is what the head football coach of Notre Dame, Brian Kelly, said. I told the coaches that they need to make sure that we're playing these early enrollees. Otherwise, we shouldn't bring them in. So why doesn't that include a freshman who's going through his first spring, who also happens to be more talented than those guys that you're talking about? Here's a good comment. Michael says it's never one person's fault to want to change. The big picture is how it affects future recruiting in the position group. And yeah, that is a problem. That is certainly because I think, Brandon talked about Vince wanting to land that great 4-star receiving core. And then, now but those guys are going to look and say, well, what happened? What happened? Why didn't he play? Why isn't why? Oh man. And then they start looking, well, hey, so-and-so didn't play. And then so-and-so else didn't play. And wow, Miles Boykin didn't catch a pass till his third year. That's kind of interesting. You know what I mean? Like that's their second year. Those are the kind of things.
Well, now it's becoming a trend too. And that's, I want to ask you about this, Brian. Mm-hmm. You had up the depth chart there. And I think we can both agree that if everything goes the way we hope it goes, that 2021 will be just fine. So Sean put in there, we need to we need to look at the transfer portal stat. I don't think that that's the answer.
Unless you want to also lose more players.
Because, you bring somebody else in who automatically is up here, then you're going to lose some of these guys in here that will eventually be up here. You've got enough guys up here to get you
develop your flipping players.
Yeah, absolutely.
As simple as that.
Transfer portal's not the answer right now.
Now, I would say that it is if you're willing to bring in a guy for depth, right? So, like if you brought in a Cameron Smith kind of player, but your goal wasn't to immediately thrust him into the starting lineup, you say, hey, look, man, right now we feel really good about our 4 or 5 guys, but, we're going to give you a chance if there's some injuries, but who's going to come in that situation? Yeah. The fact is if you bring in a transfer, so let's just say they bring in like a guy and say, okay, Lawrence Keys you're not going to play as much because we're bringing in this transfer. Okay, fine. That guy's going to play with Lawrence Keys, but you know what you're not going to have in 2022? You're not going to have Lawrence Keys. So that's why I say I would not look. Now, Notre Dame probably will. I think that's very lazy, in my opinion, but they might do that. I should say they probably will. That's just me being frustrated. But they might, and I think that'd be a mistake. Connor Patton says this, based on my limited knowledge of this, I feel angry at Brian Kelly. Am I wrong to feel that way? Connor, I wouldn't say you're wrong. I mean, you can feel it however you want. I would just encourage you not to allow things like this to make you angry. But it is okay to be frustrated.
Frustrated, I think.
I just wouldn't allow it to. Yeah. My man, you got kids you're dealing with every day. You got the babies and crying. You got plenty of things. You shouldn't be getting mad about football. Frustrated, yes.
Frustrated, yes.
But not mad. Here's one. I understand we still have good players, but other programs are able to consistently develop and play young receivers and put them in a position to make big game-changing plays, and we don't. No excuses. Agree completely.
Yeah, agreed.
Agree. And then Thomas Kemp says, why does a freshman wide receiver at Ohio State with a similar ranking as Jordan Johnson get meaningful snaps in the championship game while dealing with a more competitive wide receiver room? I know the scheme is different, but still, yeah, I mean, we could say the same thing about Clemson. We've seen it from Ohio State in the past. I've used the Chris Olave example. It's a frustrating thing. So let's see here. DJ Wilson, he knew he was not going to see the field on a consistent basis. Something about Kelly's attitude about JJ. That's the thing I have heard. Vince, I probably have had received in the last couple months at least 50 DMs or texts of people saying, why doesn't Brian Kelly like Jordan Johnson? It's not about playing time. It's about, you can just see there's like contempt in his voice when he talks about Jordan. And if Brian Kelly's not willing to see that and admit that, or if there's not people in his circle that are willing to say, hey, coach, you can't talk down a player constantly and expect him to stay.
That's the exact
There was no
opposite.
carrot. There was only stick.
It was the exact opposite of the way he talked about like Ian Book, for example. Like it was his son. You know what I mean? Like look, Brian Kelly's a passionate guy, and I have no problem with that. But you also have to watch what you say when you're a passionate guy. I've gotten myself into trouble like that before. Mm-hmm. You can't love on somebody, 1 second, and then look at somebody else and just be totally down on them, because people can read you. They know what you're saying, and he doesn't hide his emotion very well. Let's put it that way. And
as an Irish guy, he's very stubborn, which
I get it.
Which I can relate to.
Absolutely,
as an Irish dude,
I
get it. But you have to be savvy enough, and he usually is. That's what's weird. I think that's why people looked at the Jordan Johnson situation differently, because Brian Kelly has always been real, and we've praised him for this, of being really good at the carrot and the stick.
Yeah,
there's always that. Hey, so and so is playing great in practice, but he's got to do this, this, and this.
Sure.
But Jordan Johnson was always just
all stick, man.
It was just the butts. And he said, well, yeah, he's coming along. And it was always like half-hearted praise. like, whatever. I don't want to talk about him.
And he actually, there was one press conference in the spring this year where he brought up Jordan Johnson's name. Yeah. Nobody else even
in
did.
A negative fashion.
Yes. He's like, well, I know you guys all want to talk about Jordan Johnson. He's just
like he was annoyed by it.
Yeah.
Like, oh God, we would actually want to talk about one of your players. God forbid us from wanting to do that.
And that's the problem that I have.
Yeah.
Right.
Griff Weidler says, I can't wait to see Jordan Johnson go somewhere else and ball out like Jurkovec. I think there's a lot of Notre Dame fans feeling that same way.
Him. Wherever he ends up, I will be rooting for him.
Yep. Let's see here. How bad does this hurt Notre Dame's chances with Mac Markway? Now, Mac Markway is a 2023 tight end from the same high school as Jordan Johnson. Searcher, I honestly don't know if it's going to hurt. I think part of it is how close was Jordan Johnson and Mac Markway? I don't know the answer to that question. And, we've seen guys transfer before, and it doesn't impact them. I think this could be a unique situation because they're from the same high school and they're relatively close in age, just 2 years apart. But look, if Mac Markway likes to go to Notre Dame, it's going to look different for him because he's a tight end. He's not a receiver, and
he sees Michael
Notre
Mayer
Dame's
playing.
number 2 tight end this past year just got drafted in the NFL in the third round of the NFL.
Good point.
So everything is different. Could it now? If him and Jordan Johnson are close, then it depends on if Jordan Johnson's telling his friends about why he really left.
Sure.
And maybe he's going to take the high road and say, hey, look, it just wasn't a fit for me, but, hey, you got to check it out and do what's best for you. And I would imagine that's what people around Mac will say. Look, it didn't work out for Jordan. It's a different situation. Jordan plays a different position. He's coached by a different guy. Mm-hmm. And, look, if you get a chance to play tight end at Notre Dame, you take advantage of that because you don't even have to be a starter at Notre Dame to get drafted in the third round.
Yeah.
Here we go. Caleb Collins says, if I was in Jordan Johnson's shoes, I would have left after the season. I wouldn't have bothered with spring ball after seeing that offense philosophy last year. I would have left.
Well,
I get that.
Yeah, I get that too. But I think the writing was on the wall that Tommy Rees is going to have a little bit more say this year.
Exactly.
He probably wanted to feel that out a little bit, see if it was going to be any different.
I think he wanted to compete. He just didn't get that chance. I mean, look, the reason Jordan didn't leave after his freshman year is because, or after the fall, is because he thought he was going to get a chance to compete and go show it. And I don't think, he really didn't. Irvin Castaneda says, and Irvin, if I'm not pronouncing your last name correctly, please let me know. I know I've said it that way many times, but if I'm saying it wrong, please tell me because I want to get it right. It took me, Vince, how long did it take me to get your name correct? I kept saying,
a little while.
You had to give me the rhythm. You said, okay, it's like hi-ho Hidario.
Hi-ho Dario.
Dario, there you go. So I had, because I kept saying Dario. I don't know.
Yeah,
and we were friends and I kept messing it up. So
I stopped correcting people.
Yeah, so if Irvin, if I'm not getting your name right, let me know. I want to make sure I'm getting it correct. If the Dell Alexander time at Notre Dame clock finally started ticking, the kid is from Florida. The kid's from Florida. Excuse can't be used this time. Oh, the kid is gotcha. The kid is from Florida. Excuse can't be used this time. Good coach is supposed to also mentor young men. Right, I agree. I mean, this is a kid from a Catholic school, and again, I don't think that, which is frustrating because that's the reputation that Coach Alexander came to Notre Dame with.
Yeah,
being at Arizona State and Wisconsin, I think he was at Michigan State as well. I could be wrong on that, but he came with a reputation as being a really good teacher, but he just hasn't done the job at Notre Dame, and it's a little frustrating.
It's a lot frustrating. Brian, the time
you got to bounce.
Speaking of clocks ticking,
you got class.
I gotta bounce. I gotta finish my lunch and get to class. So, unfortunate news today, everybody. I'm with you on the frustration front. I get it, but we do got to push forward, and hopefully we can, Brian will talk you off the ledge as we go.
We'll do my best.
Here.
We're going to continue to work through these comments. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. But I will look out. The reason we're doing this is because I want everyone to be able to have their voice heard about this situation. And so far, I mean, I'm not down all the way to the bottom of the comments, but so far everybody's been respectful. I mean, you're frustrated, but it's been an appropriate thing. Notre Dame 2164. Everyone told BK that Jordan was an elite talent, and in BK's head, he thought, you don't tell me who is or isn't talented. This is my team, and I'll decide who is talented enough to play for my team. I wish Vince was in here for that comment because I think he would have been like, yes, that's exactly right. No, actually, Vince is still kind of off the thing. He's giving me 2 thumbs up. So, yes, he agrees with that. Sadly, I do think there's something to that. D-Rock also says, I also think BK's ego, unless it changes, Notre Dame will be a good but not in the elite program category. I understand that concern and that frustration. I do. Ed says, I know you don't like to criticize individual coaches, but doesn't this have to include problems with Del Alexander? I don't mind, Ed, criticizing individual coaches. I mean, that's part of my job. I have to be critical of them when they deserve to be criticized. It's my job to be critical of them. And when they do a good job and they're getting the work done, then it's my job to praise them for that work. But I don't push for people to be fired. That's not what I do. But to your point, yes, Coach Alexander absolutely needs to be – him and Brian Kelly and Tommy Reese need to sit down and figure some stuff out. Whether that's, hey, Coach Alexander, we need you to make some changes. You got to do a better job of this. We need you to – hey, if Lorenzo and Dion aren't ready to play this year, that's on you. If we get Tobias and CJ and Xavion and those guys aren't ready to play as freshmen, that's on you. So I do think that moment needs to happen. Maybe it already did. I don't know. But, yeah, it is very frustrating. I get the frustration. I do. Corey D says, this pisses me off as far as I'm concerned. Thanks, BK, for elevating the program, but we need someone less stubborn who can take us over the top. I get that frustration as well, but I would say that is too much on the opposite side of this. I think it's more about just getting coach to step up and say, hey, I've got to make some changes, which he's done before, as opposed to finding a new coach. But yeah, it is a frustrating thing. It's going to be hard to recruit top players when those top players don't get the opportunity to play at Notre Dame, especially at this particular position. Look, Blake Fisher's going to start as a true freshman. Michael Mayer started as a true freshman. Chris Tyree played a decent amount as a true freshman. So guys are playing. It's more of a receiver-specific problem. And that's why I say it's not just Brian Kelly. It's also Del Alexander. Look, Del Alexander needed to take Jordan Johnson under his wing and force the issue with him. I think he should have done the same thing with Xavier Watts. I think he should have done the same thing in the past with guys like Braden Lindsey and Lawrence Keys. I think that's something a coach should do. When you have a talented player, it's your job to do everything you can to develop that player, not just say, well, he's not doing what I want him to do, so screw him, I'm going to develop somebody else. I'm being very dramatic in my example, but that's what a coach is supposed to do. John Klimek says, the players have said Jordan was balling out in practice scout team. Why is this not an issue on defense? Because they play guys on defense. I mean, look, Notre Dame played like 9-10 defensive linemen a game last year at times. They played 5 linebackers at a time. They rotated in the secondary. They played 4 safeties a game last year. They played at least 3 corners a game last year until Tariq Bracy lost his mind. That's kind of part of the thing, John, is that they play guys on defense. I mean, so if Jordan Johnson would have got in the game and only got 3, 4, 5 catches last year, but he was playing 10, 12 snaps a game, he doesn't transfer. That's the thing. If Jordan Johnson gets 10 to 12, 10 to 15 snaps every game last year, gets 4 or 5 passes, I mean, then number one, maybe he breaks out and plays better. Number two, he doesn't transfer because he knows, hey, I'm going to get my shot. They're developing me. They're working with me. I got it now. I got to do my part. That's the thing is it's all up to we're not going to give you any time until you do all these things. That's not how good coaches work. I'm sorry. It's not. There's not another coach in the country at a winning program that does those things. And that's one of the reasons, in my opinion, that Notre Dame continues to fall short, not just losing in those games, but they get embarrassed in those games. Actually, yeah, I mean, that's what Christopher says. Getting embarrassed on national semifinal might be the ceiling for Notre Dame under BK. I hope not. I don't think that's going to be the case because I do think he's made a couple good hires, but there's some other hires he's made that you say, boy, that there's always like that one thing. He's like a great hire here and great hire here, but why is that guy still here? And that's kind of the issue. Thomas Kemp says, no disrespect to Joe Wilkins, but how was he even getting more playing time than Jordan Johnson to begin with? If you're going to use a player for only 20 snaps per game, why waste it on a senior and not a freshman? I got nothing for you. I completely understand. All right, RG Gerving. I lost you here real quick. I kind of bumped down. Let's go back to your comment, RJ, excuse me. There's a lot of comments we got to get through. It just bumped me down. So let's see here. I got to get back to RJ. Hate to say this, late comment, but transfer portal works both ways. I don't like the transfer portal, but personnel strategy is changing throughout college football. I'm aware that it's changing. I just don't like it. And it's going to happen, but I don't like it. Hawk1 says, how the heck do we lose a 5-star talent? I think it was Kelly. He doesn't like to give kids like this props. Kelly was reluctant to compliment Hamilton's freshman spring. I thought he would transfer. Yeah, I get it. And honestly, Hawk, some of that I understand. You don't want a freshman to but even there, they pick and choose. Like, they constantly praise Jerry Tillery when he was a freshman. But that's the frustrating thing, is like sometimes they'll praise a kid, other times they won't. I mean, some of the comments he made about Chris Tyree last year were just mind-boggling to me. It's like, do you not like the kid or something? Like, well, he's just there to spell Kyron Williams. It's like, really? That's what you're going to say about your 4-3 top 100 running back recruit? There is something to that. And to a degree, I get it, because you want freshmen to think they have to earn things. You want freshmen to think that we're just not going to hand you things. And you need to put in the work that other guys put in. But with Brian Kelly at times, it seemed like it went too far, and it goes too far. Notre Dame's 2164. Bottom line, we just lost a 5-star receiver as a direct result of Brian Kelly's stubbornness, and I couldn't be more furious. I understand. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of frustration. Griff Weidler says, I think it goes to say a lot that we weren't really surprised by this news, and it's something we've almost come to expect. I agree. Let's see here. I get so tired of that. This time is about indentured servitude. You're on a freaking full ride scholarship. This is what the response I'm talking about. You're wrong, Brian. I'm an ex-player as well, and the game was tilted too far towards indentured servitude. Another time, though. Yes, we'll talk about this another time, but I get so sick of this kind of response, Jim, and it's not necessarily you. It's just this notion behind it. That I am not saying I like how the system is right now. What I'm telling you is there are changes that they should make with the transfer system. Number one, should you have to sit out a year? Yes. But here's some other things I would do. Every national letter of intent should have, if you promise a kid playing time, if you promise a kid a jersey number, if you promise a kid a dorm room, if you promise a kid a hot dog every Thursday, if you make any promise to a kid in recruiting, you should have to put it in writing. And if you violate that commitment, then that kid can transfer without penalty. I've advocated for that as well. If a school says to a kid, hey, we're willing to release you because we want you to go, then that kid should be able to transfer without sitting out. I 100% agree with that. I have talked in the past that if coaches leave, if a position coach, coordinator, or head coaches leaves, then there should be a 30-day window where that school can convince the kid to stay, meet the new coach, convince the kid to stay, and then after that 30 days, there should be a 60-day window, 30 to 60-day window in which that kid could leave, can leave without penalty. I also believe that if a kid leaves and sits out a year, he should get that year back. I don't think your sit-out transfer year should count towards your eligibility. So, for example, if you redshirt as a freshman, and then the next year you go out and play as a freshman, and then you decide to transfer, and you have to sit out that next year should not count as your third year of eligibility. You should still have 3 years of eligibility. So, Jim, there's a lot of things that the NCAA can and should do to make it less damaging to transfer, to give kids more freedom of movement in certain situations. But just this notion of this blanket open one-time transfer is not good for the game, and it's not good for kids. It's not. And it's not just not good for kids. It's the kids that's leaving. It's going to hurt. It's going to have a big ripple effect. And what you're going to find in this era of everybody complaining, and not you, because I don't know your opinion on this, but everybody complaining about parity or the lack of parity, it's only going to get worse. Because if Kentucky signs some 3-star kid and he blows up at a freshman, do you think there's any way in heck that kid at Kentucky or Vanderbilt or South Carolina is going to stay there for 3 years? No, they're just going to transfer to the school that's the big time school like Alabama or something like that. And that's just the reality of it. So yes, and then the other part of this indenture servitude, let's go back and look and see what that actually was. I've had other people compare it to slavery. Indentured servitude is something you could not get out of until you actually paid off whatever your debt was. These kids can leave whenever they want. They can leave. There's no rule saying a kid can't leave. That is nothing like indentured servitude. It's a horrible historical example. The other part of this is my thing isn't I'm paying a debt back. So I'm coming to you at the University of Notre Dame to pay a debt back, which is what indentured servitude is. No, it's I'm coming there and you're giving me a free $60,000 scholarship. And so for all the people that say that players should be paid and a scholarship shouldn't count, here's my proposal. Fine. Start paying players. Eliminate scholarships. Make them pay their own way through school. If there's no value in a scholarship, then what's the difference? That's hyperbolic. But this notion of indentured servitude is really insulting, in my opinion. And there's nothing keeping kids from transferring. If you're an indentured servant, you couldn't just get out of it. You still owed the debt. If you didn't do it, you went to jail. You're not going to jail for transferring. It's a ridiculous example. I apologize for being fired up, Jim, but I really get tired of that. This kid's on scholarship, and no one's saying he can't leave. It's just if you leave, you have to sit out a year, because what it forces you to do is to not make an emotional decision. Flat out, that's what it does. And it also eliminates all the poaching that we're going to see, and we already are seeing. Tony Stengel says, the blind loyalty to less talented veteran players is just insane, and it's probably the biggest reason this team fails. I don't think this team fails, Tony. I mean, yes, they get whooped on the big stage, but they're still getting to the big stage. That's not failure. I mean, we need to kind of have a balanced view on this. Okay. Sean Rogers, Watson Brunell next to go. I pray not, but if they don't see why they wouldn't, if they don't crack the 2 deep by the fall, I wouldn't be surprised by that. I wouldn't be surprised to see at least one of those guys leave. I hope not. I hope I'm wrong, but I hope not. I hope it doesn't happen. Thomas Kemp says, the sad part is that it's going to take Notre Dame to lose another high impact game for BK to change his philosophy on young players like he supposedly did with the offense this offseason. He actually did. I mean, that's not supposedly, Thomas. He has done that. But yes, this is an issue, right? I mean, this is an issue. And hopefully he understands that with the transfer portal, it's not just opening up for you to take other players. You have to and look, we talked about this. I wrote an article about this at Irish Breakdown a couple months ago. And this is why I've said Brian Kelly needs to rethink his redshirt philosophy. You've got to force the issue with some of these talented players. A 3-star kid that doesn't expect to play as a freshman is going to be more patient. A kid like Jordan Johnson is not. Okay. Sean Rogers, let's see here. Is it time to look for a new receivers coach? Alexander is a subpar recruiter. He doesn't develop these kids. I would love to see Notre Dame bring in a new talented coach that can relate to the kids. Again, I don't comment on that kind of thing, Sean. I mean, everyone can have their own opinion. For me, I think the first thing I'm doing with Brian Kelly is I'm sitting down with Brian Kelly. I'm sitting down with Del Alexander. I'm sitting down with Tommy Reese. And I'm saying, hey, this isn't okay, right? We're not doing what we need to do on the recruiting trail. We're not developing these young players appropriately. You know, Brian Kelly can hold the standard of kids have to know this, this, and this, but it's now up to Del Alexander to make sure that those kids know that. He's got to coach them up and get them better prepared to handle that so that they can be responsible for more instead of just throwing them down on scout team and, hey, we'll get back together in the winter and hopefully you can fix the problems then. That's not good development. And you're not seeing that really on the defensive side of the ball. Not only kids playing, but you're seeing coaches spending more time this isn't my opinion. This is what I'm told. The successful coaches at Notre Dame have been ones that spend extra time for kids, or they have a GA that works with those kids. So maybe Clark Lee couldn't spend the extra time because he's the defensive coordinator, but that's why you have Nick Lazinski, because he then can spend that extra time. That's what good programs do. Tom Balork says, hope I'm pronouncing that right, Tom. How do Kelly and company recruit a stud receiver when the Notre Dame pattern is you have to wait 2-3 years before you get reasonable snaps, especially when other schools freshmen see the field? It's a problem. And I think that's one of the reasons Notre Dame is having a hard time getting receivers. People often ask, why does Ohio State getting all these top players every year receiver? I mean, don't those kids look at the depth chart? Yeah, they do. But they also see that if you're a freshman and you're better than a veteran, you're going to play. And most great players are not afraid of competition. And this notion of, well, he doesn't want to compete. I've actually had, not in this chat, I haven't seen it yet, but I've had people tell me, well, he didn't want to compete. It's nonsense. If he didn't want to compete, he wouldn't have come to Notre Dame. It's that I'll compete as long as you give me a legitimate opportunity. When I feel like you're not giving me that legitimate opportunity, then I'm going to bounce. Look, it's the difference between equality and equity. We should always strive for equality. I don't like the notion of striving for equity because it's not about equal outcomes. It's about equal opportunity. Kids don't care about equal outcomes. They usually don't, rarely do. And those kids are not kids you want. Kids want to know that they're getting an opportunity. Hey, did you give me the same coaching, the same opportunity to develop as you gave that other kid? If you did, and I wasn't good enough, I get that. I'm going to stay. I'm going to keep balling. I'm going to keep competing. But if I feel like, hey, look, I got 8 reps, he got 30. Hey, you spent extra time with him, or he got this, and you sent me down scout team and didn't work with me. He's in meetings with you, and I'm not. That's not equality, right? That's not equal opportunity to go out and develop as a player, and that's what's missing, in my opinion. Kenny Moore, Kenny, haven't heard from you a long time, buddy. It's good to hear from you. If Notre Dame ever wants to catch the likes of Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson, you simply can't allow talent like Phil Dracovic and Jordan Johnson to leave your program. This is ridiculous. I agree. And here's the other thing. Phil Dracovic did not transfer from Notre Dame because he wasn't going to play last year. It was the same thing. He was not going to be given the opportunity to compete. Plain and simple, it was made very clear to him, and there wasn't a lot of interest in developing him for whatever reason. And that's a mistake. Dropping dimes, I'm calling it Drew Pine transfers next. That would shock me. Drew Pine's already 3 semesters into his college. He's already almost halfway to graduating. There's a 5th-year senior ahead of him and a freshman behind him who has an injury history. And Drew also is a very smart kid from a great family that understands the value of a Notre Dame degree. And here's the other thing you have to consider about Drew. Drew's basically a freshman again. So he can stay at Notre Dame, get that degree, and still have 3 years to graduate if he stays through next year. So I think Drew will look at this a little bit differently than a guy like Jordan Johnson, who is going to get who's Jordan's looking at like, hey, he could be a first-round draft pick. I don't know if Drew Pine's looking at, hey, I'm not going to be first. I'm going to be first-round draft pick. I don't know if that's kind of what he is looking at. All right. Jacob Dunn says, Irish Breakdown is all over Notre Dame news, best outlet out there. Jacob, I appreciate that very, very much. All right, let's get back on track. Yes, I agree with that, but of course I'm a little bit biased, so it's nice to know that other people agree with that. All right, Searcher Green. You would think Notre Dame can't develop offensive players. They would play freshman softs before they get undeveloped. Christopher says, if as BK implies, JJ had horrible traits, why were the citizens of Northwest Indiana subjugated to this dangerous kid in the first place? This is the kind of hyperbole that doesn't help the conversation. Because Brian Kelly saying he doesn't have traits doesn't mean he's out there robbing and mugging people, right? It's about, is he going to class? Is he on time for workouts? Is he putting in the same level of work at a workout? These kind of things don't help the conversation. And I understand, I would imagine you're being hyperbolic, but I mean, this doesn't help. Okay, John Rich says, how many times have we heard in a Bama, OSU, and Clemson telecast that true freshman, insert player's name here, receiver made an outstanding play? John, you're absolutely right. I mean, this has been problematic for a while. And you could, so in the past, people say, well, Notre Dame doesn't recruit like those schools. Well, okay, you can't say that about Jordan Johnson. Oh, Notre Dame doesn't get 5 stars. Of course, those guys are playing their 5 stars or their top 50 guys or top 30 guys or whatever. Okay, well, here's a top 30 guy. Here's the guy who's number 28 player in the country. Here's a top 50 player, 5-star player, all that type of stuff. And so what's the excuse now, right? And again, this is a problem that's been especially specific to wide receiver. And so absolutely right, John. And this is a position, I'm telling you, this is a position, it should be, at most places, it's easier to get a freshman on the field at receiver. Because at most places, they will have a freshman say, hey, look, we're just going to give you these 3 or 4 roles. And then as you develop and you get more experience and you're with the varsity, not running on the scout team, running other teams' plays, but you're running your plays, you're getting those 5, 10, 12 reps a game. You get a target here, you get a target there. And then when you're playing teams like South Florida or this year Toledo, Purdue, maybe you blow a team out kind of early. Then now all of a sudden you can say, hey, let's get this kid some targets. Let's get this kid the ball. And he's already got experience. He's already played 10, 12 snaps in the past. And that's how kids develop, John. And, look, I mean, I've had a kid in the past at the Division III level, 6'4", 205-pound linebacker that just couldn't figure out linebacker. So they gave him to me at receiver, and kid couldn't learn plays. But he was 6'4", 205 pounds. He ran a 4.5, which is a freaky athlete. That's like Will Fuller speed at the Division III level. Look, could learn the place. You know what we did? Gave him a wristband. And every time we called a play, he'd have to look at the wristband, and I told him exactly what to do. Recently, like, look, you can have the quarterback, just tell him what to do. Have the guy next to him, tell him what to do. Hey, man, run a post route, whatever. But you got to get these guys on the field. Sean Higgins, this was asked earlier, and we'll address it again for people that are joining a little bit late. Do we now hit the portal to replace him from a depth perspective? I would not. I would not. I don't think that helps the situation at all. Because I think all that does is then creates more players leaving. I think you need to coach up the players that are there. That to me is the key. Coach the guys up that you have on the team. And so I just feel like at this point in time, you have to get those guys ready. I mean, I know we're looking that. Look, there's Notre Dame does have talent, right? They do have talent. They just have to figure out. They just have to figure out how to develop those players. But you've got enough talent on the roster to develop them, coach them up. That should be your job. Here we go. Him leaving is only going to hurt wide receiver recruiting, don't you think? I don't know if it'll hurt. We'll have to find out. I don't want to assume that it will, but it's not going to help. That's for sure. Jay says, it's a Coach Kelly thing, not JJ problem. Should have added that. Okay, I get you, Jay. You had that earlier comment. It is a Kelly thing, but I mean, it's not 100% on Brian Kelly. It's not 100% on Dell Alexander. It's not 100% on Jordan Johnson. And it's not 0% on any of those guys either. Everybody played a role in this. There's things Jordan Johnson should have done differently. And if I was advising him, I would have said, hey, man, you need to do this, this, and this. But that's the whole thing is that's what the coaches should have been doing. And they should have, you don't just, it's almost like they gave up on him. And it was way too early to do that, in my opinion. Okay, Corey D. I vehemently believe that Notre Dame can get almost anyone they want in terms of head coach. And yet we have a guy who's incredibly stubborn and unwilling to do the things necessary to win big. I'm pissed. I understand you're pissed, but again, number one, Notre Dame can't get anybody that they want. And number two, the reason Brian Kelly has won at Notre Dame when other coaches failed is because Brian Kelly's a really good football coach. Yes, he's stubborn, and that stubbornness has hurt him. But we have to be more rational when we have these kind of conversations and say, hey, look, yes, he's stubborn, and this thing he's doing with the receivers really ticks me off, and it's hurting the program. But there's also a lot of things Brian Kelly's done that help the program. We have to have a more balanced, objective view. Be pissed about this, but I don't want this to turn into this is why Brian Kelly sucks and this is why Brian Kelly's going to fail, because Notre Dame's been in the playoff 2 of the last 3 years. No, it hasn't gone the way they wanted, but you're not a failure when you've done that. John Klimek says this needs to be a lesson learned quickly, and Notre Dame needs to move on. Watt, Styles, etc. need to get on the field. Staff needs to make the appropriate changes. I agree, John. It needs to be addressed now, and they got to make sure that this issue that they don't lose Lorenzo, that they don't lose Xavier. I agree. Bobby Lolly, this is a good comment. I understand not rewarding bad behavior, but 99% of high school staffs know how to handle this balance better than the Notre Dame staff. It is a coach's job to find a way to get playmakers on the field. I agree. Okay, Sydney Moore says, it was after the South Florida game I knew JJ was in the doghouse of Kelly. I feel like there's just some players that get put into the doghouse the moment they step on campus and rarely get out. I'd like to say you're being overly dramatic, Sydney, but I mean, you could give me enough evidence to make it hard for me. It's hard for me to push back on that. Tommy Leonard says structural systemic issues with playing freshman receivers. Jay says, I hope Watt doesn't follow suit. I agree. Let's see here. So Liam, follow up on your comment earlier. He said in an interview he missed some practices. It was injury related. Okay, Tom Balork says 5-star and freshmen seem to be able to achieve success on defense. On offense, it seems to be a different story. Who has the fingerprints most on the offense? And that would be Brian Kelly. Well done, Tom. Let's see here. Okay. Thomas Walsh, I almost didn't tune in because I knew I would just get pissed between this and Jerk. This hurts ND for years to come. It could, but again, I mean, there's enough. There's enough talent at Notre Dame that if Coach Kelly says, you know what, this situation didn't get handled correctly. This didn't get handled by me. This didn't get handled well by Dell. This didn't get handled well by Jordan. Okay, it is what it is. Let's make sure this doesn't happen again. And let's correct course, because as we said at the very beginning of the show, there is a lot of talent still left. As long as guys can stay healthy and they can develop Lorenzo Styles and Deion Colsey and Xavier Watts, they're going to be okay. Yes, there's some problems in the future, but if you can develop the kids you have and hopefully they can stay healthy, they're going to be okay. It needs to be addressed, however, to make sure that this doesn't happen again. That's the thing is every coach is good. Look, every coach makes mistakes this way. Every single one. And that includes Nick Saban, that includes Urban Meyer, but the great coaches look at those mistakes and say, you know what? Yeah, that kid didn't do what he needed to do, but he's 18, I'm 58, and you're however old the assistant coach is. You know what? We needed to have done better. Let's do better next time. And it doesn't have to be this fire this guy, fire that guy. Kelly's going to lose 1,000 games. It just, we have to be able to be objective about it and be critical of it, but then not take it to, and you're not doing this, Thomas. I know you're not. And then take it to kind of to get that other thing. And Corey says, again, perhaps this will prompt Kelly to get Watts and the other young receivers on the field, but I doubt it. Potentially not, but hopefully it does. Louis Saban, pretty disappointed, had high hopes he would play, especially after hearing him kicking butt against our defense. This really upsets me. All right. Garrow out Edwards. I hope I'm saying that right. No disrespect to those guys, but it is troubling that the Finks and Salernos of the world get more reps than elite recruits. I agree. Ed says, refusing to play young receivers because they don't know the entire playbook just seems stupid, and Kelly is not stupid. Are you sure that's his reasoning? It's not about the entire playbook. That is what I'm saying is, yeah, it kind of is. Look, here's the deal, Ed. You can believe me or not. Look, at this point in time, after as long as I've been saying this, if people still don't believe me, either A, you just started listening to me, and Ed, I know that's not true, or B, you just don't believe me. This isn't my opinion. Okay? I'm not telling you this because I think this. This is what I've been told by players, former coaches, parents for years, and it's been a consistent theme. At receiver, more than any other position, you have to know a lot of what they're doing. You have to be able to know it almost at the same level as the veterans, and the complexity of that is that when you line up to run a play, it's not just like, okay, I have a corner route, and if the cornerback is playing up, I run it this way. If he's playing off, I run it this way. If he does this, I convert it to a stop. That's not how it is. Or if you're teaching a vertical route, hey, I have to attack his leverage. If he sinks, I slip inside, get on top. If he stays out, I got to fight outside. If he bails, I got to drop at 15 and run a comeback. It's not that kind of complexity. It's I could be running a slant, an out, a comeback, a post, or a dig, all in the same play based on what the defense does. And I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but that's the kind of the complexity. At Ohio State, they have similar complexity. The difference is they don't ask their freshmen to know it all. They simplify things for freshmen. So when a freshman is on the field, it's you're running a post, you're running a dig, you're running a comeback. And they simplify it a lot more to make it easier to digest. They don't hold the freshman to the same standard, and they'll adjust their play calling and say, hey, look, we got to get this guy the ball. I've had people that I trust and know at Ohio State that would say, Urban Meyer would go to the position coaches and say, hey, this talented young player, he's going to play at least 10 snaps every game. And if he's not ready to play, then that's on you. Simple as that. I know that happens at Ohio State. At least it did when Urban Meyer was there. He's a pretty good coach, right? I know. I don't know. I've been told that that's how it is at Alabama and Clemson, that there are certain players that when Nick Saban and Dabo know, hey, this guy's really good. It's you go to the coach, say, hey, we need to get this guy ready to play. And if he's not ready to play, I'm not blaming him. I'm blaming you. And there's that level of accountability. I've never heard that at Notre Dame. I've never heard that happens. It just doesn't, because that doesn't fit the philosophy of what Brian Kelly wants to do. And to this point, I think this was, yes, this is from Bobby McCarthy on Facebook. Why can't Kelly and Reese dummy down the playbook offense, so to speak, to get young receivers on the field? They don't need to dumb it down necessarily for everybody. They just need to find specific roles that, hey, when so-and-so's in the game, this is what we're going to use. And so-and-so is talented enough to where we have to be able to do that. Okay. I'm going to stick to receiver here. Christopher says, when BK talks about traits, isn't he implying that he and his staff brought a terrible human to being South Bend? This is ridiculous, Chris. I mean, this isn't productive. You know that that's not what it is. You know that's not what it is. Tommy Leonard says, these kind of stories almost make you want to take some time off as a fan, and it's extremely frustrating. Hey, Tommy, don't do that, okay? Don't take time off as fan, right? Suck it up, deal with it. Let's see what's next, and we're gonna keep rolling. Pat Quinn, is there a chance at being able to re-recruit Jordan Johnson? Sure, there's a chance, but I don't think they have any interest in doing so. All right, John Rich says, Kelly can change his behavior. He's done it before. He is not in-game Chucky he used to be. Maybe he'll wake up. That's the hope, John, and that's why I'm not like jumping off of a cliff here like some people and fire Brian Kelly, because we've seen him change before, and hopefully this is one of those situations that he looks at and says, hey, everybody didn't handle this one correctly. And he's not alone. This isn't the only kid that we've lost. Jordan didn't do things he needed to do. We didn't do things we needed to do. You know, his position coach didn't do things he needed to do. We all got to get better. We all have to improve and make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again. D-Rock says, Leadership 101, develop your circle of influence. I just don't see it from BK. His way only. Trust and listen to your coaches and players. I agree. DBZ, are your sources saying anyone else will transfer? Not definitively, but there are some guys in decision-making mode. Real quick, just because this is kind of receiver, Ian Moran says, really like KJ Winston a lot. What are your thoughts of him at the wide receiver position? My understanding, Ian, is that they're recruiting him to play safety. I haven't paid attention to him as a receiver. I haven't watched his film in a while because it was just sophomore film. And if he schedules a visit and gets close to visiting, I'll probably study his film a little bit now. P-Dub says, what are your feelings on the season now? They haven't changed. I wasn't anticipating Jordan Johnson being a big part of the offense. I was hopeful. But again, as Vince and I said at the beginning, I'm not as worried about 2021 with this as I am 2022. I'm really not. Because here's the thing. We went through the receiver depth chart. Okay, and I'm gonna bring it up again, so we can kind of go through this for people that join late. So what we talked about before is there's some concerns about not 2021 per se, but more so movie years, because the asterisks are referring to those guys. That's a fifth year, and those guys may not be brought back for that. So if two of these guys don't come back, or one or two of these, maybe three of these guys don't come back for whatever reason, then all of a sudden the depth chart starts getting really thin. But when you look at 2021, there's a lot of guys there. The issue being Austin, Lindsey, somewhat to a lesser degree, Keys and Wilkins have had injury problems, and Xavier Watts, Jay Brunell may transfer, may not, but they haven't played a whole lot. And then, of course, you have the freshmen. But here's where that Notre Dame in 2021. You have Avery Davis, is reliable, dependable. You have Austin, Lindsey, Keys, Wilkins, Watts, Brunell, Styles, Colsey, Thomas. You also have a deep tight end depth chart. You can use two tight ends more this year because you still have Michael Mayer. You have a unique running back in Kyron Williams who could play a lot of slot. You could put Chris Tyree in the slot. There's a lot you can still do personnel-wise, even if you have a couple injuries at receiver after Jordan Johnson gets hurt. So unless there's just like 3 or 4 bad injuries at receiver, which is kind of what we had in 2020, in 2020, it's not a situation where I'm like, oh, it's changing my opinion of 2021. It doesn't. Is it a blow? Is your margin for error now smaller? Yes, absolutely. Because I felt like if Austin went down again and you coached up Jordan Johnson, I'm ready, he could step into the lineup. You don't really have that guy now, or if you do, it's going to be a true freshman in Deion Colsey. And that's problematic when you consider not about Deion. If I had a receivers coach in Notre Dame that I trusted to develop young, talented players, I'd say, you know what, Deion will be able to play. He's a talented kid. But we haven't seen that, and that's problematic for me. So, but it doesn't necessarily change my opinion for 2020. Or 2021. It's more about for down the road. Okay. Pat Quinn says, do you think young wide receivers not getting reps as a result of BK taking more of a high-level CEO role and giving his position coaches more autonomy? This hasn't been a problem his entire tenure. And you talked to the Stefferson. Okay, so I want to address 2 things there. Number one is he has not taken more of a CEO role until this year, from what I'm told. Kelly was very involved last year, and he – look, anyone that's been at the Notre Dame practice knows Brian Kelly's not just sitting back doing nothing. Okay, he is involved. I think that from a who decides, he flat out been told many times, if Kelly says, hey, this kid's going to play, then you're going to play that kid whether you think he can play or not. And as you should, he's the head coach. The head coach says he wants to play somebody, you play somebody. So that has been a problem. Regarding Stefferson, I've seen people point to this before. Number one, you don't point to the anomalies. And there's 2, actually. The 2 anomalies are TJ Jones as well. You don't point to the anomalies and use them as the rule, right? Just like you don't say, hey, every 6th-round quarterback has a chance to become a Hall of Fame quarterback just because Tom Brady did it, right? We can all agree that you don't point the anomalies to define the rule. And the fact of the matter is when you look at those situations, you have to look at context. And so, for example, you take TJ Jones in 2010. They didn't have a lot of receivers. They had to move a running back to wide receiver and Theo Riddick that year, remember? They were very thin at wide receiver. And there were some injury problems there. Guys not developing problems. They had no depth. That's why TJ played a little bit. In 2016, Kevin Stefferson barely played the first game against Texas until Torrey Hunter got hurt. When Torrey Hunter got hurt, then you saw Kevin Stefferson step up the next year, or the next week, against, I believe it was against Nevada. I'm looking at, Nevada caught 3 passes for 35 yards and a touchdown because Torrey Hunter didn't play. The next week he had 2 catches for 42 yards, again, because Torrey Hunter didn't play. And so he got that opportunity to go out and perform and play. But look at who the receivers were on that team. Okay, once Torrey Hunter got hurt, here's who the other receivers were. Equanimous St. Brown, true sophomore. Kevin Stepherson, true freshman. C.J. Sanders, true sophomore. Chris Fink, true sophomore. Corey Holmes, junior, not a very good player. Chase Claypool, true freshman. So it was a situation where you didn't have veteran players to turn to. When you don't have veteran players to turn to, you have to play younger guys. So that's why Kevin Stepherson's situation is unique. And if Notre Dame would have had multiple injuries this year, then you'd have seen Jordan Johnson play. And that's why I was hoping he would have stuck it out. But when you don't feel like your coaches have faith in you, then you're going to leave. And I think ultimately and this 100% my opinion. Okay. So this isn't me giving you information I've gotten from sources. This isn't me, this is 100% my opinion on this. Okay. My opinion is, had Brian Kelly not been so publicly critical of Jordan Johnson every time his name was mentioned, I think they would have had a better shot at getting him to stay. Just my opinion. But having been in the shoes, been a player, and again, not at the level that Jordan, but look, pride is pride, right? And confidence and faith are the same no matter where you go. If my coach publicly kept saying negative things about me, I would think, my coach doesn't like me. And why would I stay here somewhere that I'm not liked? So yes, he needs to keep on that. Keith says Kelly's mentality of making this kid's weight is weak. How's the no soda thing going? About 2 weeks ago, I bought a 2-liter of Mountain Dew, so I fell off the wagon a little bit, but that's the only time I've had it. And since then, I've still been sort of a no pop thing, which my wife is certainly helping with. KMA Preston says, does losing a talented receiver like JJ hurt recruiting? Could seeing him not playing time impact other studded receiver decisions? Again, I don't know the answer to that. And could it? Yes. And I don't want to say it will because I don't know. Every kid is different. I don't know. I would be concerned about, however, that it would. And I think the staff needs to be proactive with guys like Tobias Merriweather and CJ Williams. And I would literally get on the phone with them first chance possible and explain to them what happened. Hey, look, here's the deal. And not that you bash Jordan Johnson, but look, it just didn't work out. It wasn't the right fit, but don't let other schools define the narrative. You have to be proactive in recruiting and explain to kids why this didn't work out and why they're different and why their circumstance will be different, whether it is or isn't. You have to explain that. That, to me, is what the staff should do. If I'm Brian Kelly and if I'm Mike Elston, the recruiting coordinator, I'm talking to Coach Reese and I'm talking to Coach Alexander, and I'm saying, hey, I need you on the phone by the end of the day with Tobias Merriweather, CJ Williams, Darius Clemens, to Xavion Bradshaw. I mean, all those guys. And you tell them about what happened. You explain to them why, and you explain to them why their situation is different. You better have to do that. Okay, DBZ. Yeah, I get it. It's frustrating. All right, so here we go. So this is all Jonathan's fault. I'll take credits for this. I was really enjoying Aaron Rodgers leaving Green Bay, and karma is evening things out. Yep, that's it right there. We're all going to blame Jonathan. This is who it is. Okay. Some of these are just kind of saying the same thing. I want to kind of go through and I'm back. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm gonna go through and see if there's actually any questions because we're getting a little bit long here. And let's see here. Okay, Sean Rogers says, this is clarifying an earlier comment. I meant to hit the transfer portal for depth, not to start over someone. As long as everyone, that makes more sense. As long as everyone is healthy now, I still wouldn't do it. I would say, hey, Dell, Coach Alexander, you better make sure that Lorenzo Styles and Deion Colsey are ready to play. You better have Xavier Watts in your office in 20 minutes, explaining to him why you're going to develop him, and you better get him ready to play. Because again, there's definitely enough talent for them to be okay in 2021. Now, here's what I would say to you, Sean. if 3 or 4 of those potential fifth-year guys don't come back in 2022, then I would look for the portal for depth. But I don't think they need to hit the portal for depth right now. I really don't. I think they need to coach up the guys that they have. That to me is really where it's at. So I'm going to try to see. So Searcher Green says, you've said if Watts transfers 3 times, is there buzz going around about that happening? No, but well, there's buzz in this chat. People are talking about it. And the fact is that Xavier Watts is in the same boat that Jordan Johnson is in as a young freshman who wanted to play early, thought he'd play early, that's not getting that opportunity and doesn't seem to be pushing. Now, he had some injuries late in the spring, which kept his playing time down. So his situation is a little different. But again, the fact is this is, as we analyze the depth chart, we have to talk about if this happens, now they're in a problematic area. And when you look at potential transfers, I mean, Brady Lindsey's not going to transfer, right? He's going to play. Lawrence Keys isn't going to transfer right now. He looks to be in the position to play. Looking at the guy saying, if this guy transfers, that guy transfers, because they're in the same boat as Jordan Johnson, then that puts Notre Dame in a tough spot. That's where it comes from. Okay, Corey D. Hope the Indy media presses Kelly on this. Too often they ask him soft questions. Number one, I'm part of the Notre Dame media, and I don't think I ask him soft questions. Number two, in defense of my media brethren, the fact of the matter is Brian Kelly's been here 11 years. We know what he's going to say. And then if we press him too much, the reality is Notre Dame controls access. They can tell us how often we can be at practice or not be at practice or limit Zoom. I mean, you have to be careful with that. And the fact is that, Brian Kelly is a guy that you know what he's going to say, know what he's going to do. And, we can press him all we want, and then we can create some adversarial relationship between him and then us. And I understand why a lot of people are hesitant to do that, because other people are far more dependent on a relationship with Brian Kelly than I am. I don't really care because I'm an analyst. I can break down film. I can break down the program without having a relationship with Brian Kelly. That's just how our site is geared towards. But in other places, it's geared differently, and I understand, and I'm sympathetic to why they have to toe a little bit more of a sensitive line than I do. I do, and every site is got a different goals and different objectives and different coverage strategies that makes them say, look, we got to be a little bit more careful about when we push and when we press back. That's just the nature of it. I just have chosen to go a different route. And I understand the cost to that. That's okay. But that's what I've chosen to do. Okay, let's see here. Wayne Smith, here we go. Let's get Avery Davis the ball more this year. I agree. Notre Dame media should start bashing Watt, saying he can't play at Notre Dame. Kelly would make him into a starter. I needed that comedy relief, Sergio. That's really, really good. Jonathan, this was asked earlier. I'll say it again. Any chance they could make a push to keep him similar to what they did with Houston Griffith? Yes, they could, but there doesn't seem to be any interest in that. I don't think Notre Dame prepares so when Houston left, he just entered the portal and it got reported on, right? This is a different situation. Notre Dame prepared a graphic for him. I'm going to pull it up, but I'm pretty sure that the graphic of him transferring was one that was made by Notre Dame. Let me pull it up here. Yes, that looks like one that was made by Notre Dame. I could be incorrect on that, but it looks like one that was made by Notre Dame. That looks a lot like the things that they do. So if they're making him a graphic to leave, the odds are pretty good that they're not then also trying to convince him to stay. Okay, let's see here. I'm just trying to find some other questions. There's a lot of comments that are just sort of repeating what we've already discussed, and I want to make sure that we get to some of these things. Agree, Brad? All right, let's see here. This is Mike Huff. Don't you think it's on Jordan? I mean, he needs to put in the work. How do you know he's not putting in the work, Mike? How do you know? Are you at practice? Are you talking to coaches? Are you talking to players? Are you talking to other people? I mean, how do you know he's not putting in the work? This is my frustration with this. Number one, we have said in this podcast there are things Jordan needed to do better. I have said flat out that there's not a single person involved in this that has no accountability for this. Everybody has accountability for this. So to sit there and say it's on, but then to say that it's all on Jordan is, to me, just as egregious as saying it's 100% on Brian Kelly. look, you're not at practice. So hey, look, share with me the sources that you're talking to. You don't have to name them, but tell me, are you talking to coach? You talking to players, talking to parents to tell you he's not working? Because I've never heard that. I've heard the things that he's got to work better in the classroom and some stuff like that. But how do you know he's not working? Explain that to me, Mike. I don't understand how you could say that. So how do you? That's a frustrating comment. I mean, so when they put Joe Schmidt in the game over Niles Morgan, is it because Niles wasn't working? That's a frustrating comment. And he says, any reason you think our highly recruited players struggle here? I don't think it's. I think that's too broad of a comment. I think that there are plenty of highly ranked players that do pan out. Michael Mayer is a 5-star. He panned out, right? He's a heck of a freshman. So I think, but it's just at this particular position, there's been some problems with it. Or in the guys that do pan out, it takes them a long time to pan out. I mean, can you guarantee that Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool would have stayed for 4 years had there been a transfer rule that allowed them to leave as freshmen? You can't guarantee that. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but you can't say that. All right, here we go. I'm trying to find some more questions here. I don't have any thoughts on this. Any early thoughts on where you think he'll go? On Twitter, someone suggested he joins Phil at BC. I think that's probably just Notre Dame fans wanting all the transfers to go to one place. I would imagine he would. I mean, imagine Missouri is going to be a school he'll look at, but I don't want to. That would just be guessing for me. I don't have any information on that, but we'll see. All right, I'm going to try to go through here and wrap up some of these comments. If you all have any questions as we wrap up or you want to talk about this, let's get back to it. We'll be back again tomorrow. We'll have another live podcast. We're pretty much, as y'all are seeing, we're pretty much going to be live every day about 1 o'clock to talk about different things. We're starting our thing where our podcasts are now going to be live shows, and then we'll answer questions. If you want to do a super chat, we can obviously get your question in during the show, but a lot of it will be kind of getting them in at the end. Okay. Okay, let me see here. Melvin, I don't understand what you're at. Is the transfer portal not a thing anymore? Not watching live, catching up. I don't understand what you mean by that. He's in the transfer portal. So maybe it might be over my head, but I apologize. But if you could clarify that, I'd appreciate. See, this is Johnny Jimenez. Talent loss is upsetting. Teams recover and recruit other players. The train will always continue to move. No, look, everybody keeps telling me that Notre Dame has trouble recruiting top receivers, right? And then you finally get a 5-star receiver. Oh, we can't compete with Alabama because we don't get 5-star receivers. Well, you got one, and he's lost. I mean, it's never this simple. It's not, and we've explained why. Okay. I'm trying to find a few more comments here. Okay, here. Corey, I appreciate that. And I didn't take it personally towards me. I just look, these are people I work with. I have a lot of respect for people, some people in the media, and I understand, like, some guys are in a completely different situation than me. Like, so take Lou Samoji, for example. I loved Lou, but Lou was not going to hammer Brian Kelly because when what Lou was being asked to do, he was a reporter. He was, to me, the best at it. He was looking to report the news, tell stories. He was not someone looking to dive into X's and O's of why things was happening. And that's part of the reason he wanted to bring me on. So I don't think there was any advantage to Lou Samoji for hammering Brian Kelly to get the answers he wants. There was nothing that was going to help him in what he wanted to do. That was a judgment call he had to make. Other people have to make a similar situation. Hey, I'm going to hammer him because my job is this, and in order for me to effectively do my job, I need to get answers to this. Everybody's situation is different. So here we go. So Irvin, so I was close. So I did okay. I'll try to do better, and I could never I struggled in Spanish class, so I'll try to get it right. But I appreciate your response. Okay. He said, Mike Huff, good. There got to be a reason they don't want him to stay, right? Yeah, it could. I mean, I could easily just to say with as much evidence as you have that he didn't work, that they didn't want him to stay because Kelly's tired of answering questions about it. I have as much evidence of that being true as you do of saying he didn't work. So here we go. Okay. So Brian Denbo says, with this clearing up a scholarship spot, what player on the board would you want in his place? If already answered, sorry. No, I haven't answered it yet. Brian, I don't think this necessarily means that that extra scholarship is going to go to receiver. I don't think it automatically means that they're going to bring in 4 receivers next year, especially if the younger guys stay. Xavier Watts and Jay Brunell stay. I think what you could see is maybe, hey, we would have liked to have brought in a 5th DB. Well, now we have room. Hey, we would have liked to bring in 2 defensive tackles, but we really only had room for 1, so we couldn't take Donovan Heinisch because we had to take, or Caleb Artis because we wanted to wait for for Anthony Lucas. So, hey, let's use that extra scholarship there. But honestly, with where Notre Dame is, this just gets them closer to 85. It doesn't necessarily mean they automatically have a scholarship in the 22 class. You know what I mean? So this is just gets them closer to getting down to 85, because from my last evaluation of the depth chart of the scholarship chart, they're still projected to be over 85 with a smaller 18 to 20 man class. So I'm going to look at those numbers again. We'll have something like that on here soon, but I don't think it's a guarantee that this automatically goes to a receiver. Jay Clampin Investment says Dell is definitely on the hot seat. While the player's accountable, it's the coach's responsibility to bring the best out of the player. Jay, this is one of the best responses. This is 100% right. The player holds responsibility for here. The coaches hold responsibility for this. At the end of the day, however, I believe, and I think that you're saying, so if I'm incorrect in me reading into what you're saying, let me know. But I take it as, yes, Jordan's responsible for his part of it. But it's the grown-ups, the adults who are paid 6 and 7 figures that ultimately hold the ultimate responsibility for getting guys ready to play. If all the players at your position stink and you don't say, hey, well, you know what, I'm doing a great job coaching, it's them. All right, so this is what I was taught in coaching. This is something that I was taught, and I've heard from Urban Meyer and Dan Mullen back when they were at Bowling Green, and coaches that I worked for that I thought were great coaches. And I've heard great coaches say this. If you have something happen at your position and it's a kid here and a kid there, then you can kind of chalk it up to, hey, maybe that kid didn't work out. But when you have certain things that continue to happen over and over and over and over again, then it's not the players, it's you. It's you as a coach. And that's why I say at receiver, this has been a problem for a while. Different receiver coaches, same problem. So at the end of the day, Brian Kelly has to be willing to look in the mirror and say, this can't happen. This has to change. It has to change. Okay, so let's try to get through this. Last few wrapping up. Here we go. So Wayne Smith says, do we have anybody who can make a position change if needed at receiver? And he did correct that down here. I do wish that they had an edit button for this. Wouldn't that be nice? Twitter and YouTube chats need an edit button. There's no doubt about it. So I don't think so. And I think so. Here's what we'll say. Okay. So let's take this example, Wayne, and perhaps this is what you mean. So we talked at the beginning that I don't think there's a need for Notre Dame to go out and get a transfer. I think if you look at the depth chart for what it is, and we'll pull it up again. If you look for the depth chart for what it is, 2021, they're going to be okay. They are. They're going to be okay. As long as guys are healthy, they're going to be okay. 2022, it gets a little bit shakier. So you could say, okay, well, don't love where we're at with the depth chart. So we need to figure somebody else out. Well, yeah, there are some guys. So, first example that I think of is goodness gracious, I'm getting JoJo Johnson. Everybody keeps typing JJ into the chat today, but JoJo Johnson's one that I would look at. JoJo's a pretty good high school receiver. He actually worked out at receiver at Notre Dame camp back in summer of 2019. And he's a guy that could maybe do it. There's other guys that have played DB that have played receiver. So, yeah, there's a couple guys that you could look at. And Ramon Henderson, for example, some thought he would have been a better receiver prospect than a corner prospect. He's one that if Ramon gets buried on the depth chart at corner, let's just say hypothetically that Ramon Henderson gets beat out by Philip Riley, He gets beat out by Ryan Barnes. He gets beat out by Clarence Lewis, and he gets beat out by Caleb Offord and Tariq Bracy. Get the point? It's a lot of numbers there. And you say, look, Austin's hurt again, and Lindsey's hamstring is acting up. Let's go put this really fast 6'2" kid at a receiver and give him a chance. Yeah, I could see that. But then we go back to the issue of, Wayne, is are you then going to make an exception for Ramon to not have to know the whole playbook? Or are you going to say, hey, let's get him 3 or 4 things coached up. If you're Tommy Rees, you sit Dell down and say, look, we're going to move Ramon. We're not moving him to sit the bench. Okay, because that's the thing is you don't move players from a position to sit the bench. I think it's a bad policy. So you move Ramon and you say, hey, look, I need you to teach him how to run a hitch, how to convert a hitch. I need you to teach him how to run a go route, how to convert a go. I need you to teach him how to run crossing routes. I need you to teach him how to run drags. I need you to teach, and that's it. That's it. That's all, a post route. That's it. And we're not going to make him read. We're not going to make him change. This is your job. If you have to give him a wristband that he has to look at every time to know what the calls are, then you make him a flipping wristband. But so there are some guys, Wayne, to your question, that I think could move if needed. And that's where this could get interesting. So let's just say Ramon Henderson, who, again, is basically a true freshman all over again because of the COVID year. Let's say he gets beat out at corner. You say, hey, look, instead of taking a 4th receiver in the 22 class, we're going to take a 3rd corner because we like our freshman corners. They like Ryan Barnes, Philip Riley, Chance Tucker is playing. You're going to leave JoJo there. Say, hey, okay, we're going to move JoJo. We're going to move Ramon. So since they're both young, so instead of replacing Jordan with a freshman, or a recruit, we're going to replace him with Ramon and or JJ or JoJo. Now that opens up a scholarship at corner. That could be another way they go with it. To your point. So that'd be kind of interesting roster management. Okay, let's see here. P-Dub, this is a great point. Perception is 9/10 as far as wide receiver development or lack thereof is the reality. I agree. Perception is reality in a lot of ways. And there's a perception that they don't develop freshmen. And if you can say, hey, it's not, or whatever the case may be. But that is the case. And I think that has impacted Notre Dame's recruiting. Because how does a program that produced Golden Tate and Michael Floyd and TJ Jones and Will Fuller and all these players is all of a sudden having a problem recruiting big time receivers? Let's think about that for a second. Get in the Rock says apologies have addressed earlier, but how does this affect Alexander? How hot is the seat right now? I don't know how hot his seat is, but I definitely think there needs to be some conversations between him, the head coach, and the offensive coordinator to figure out. They need to get some things figured out. Lula Saban says, I think that scholarship goes to the defense. It could. D-Rock says, time to hit the like button. Yes, agree. Subscribe and hit the notification button before exiting. Another great show. Thanks, D-Rock. I appreciate it. Let's see here. So Joe says, do you think that as long as Brian Kez is the coach, the offense will not change? Sorry, Tommy. I think the offense is already changing. I think we saw that in the spring game. I would encourage you to check out my post-game recap of the Blue Gold game. We showed some things and talked about some things that I thought would happen, or that did happen, that they showed that I thought, hey, there's some change. RPOs, moving the pocket. Here's a comment. So, and I don't know if I addressed this in the podcast, but this is what I talked about last night with a buddy of mine. He said, are you concerned that guys were getting open? Some guys were kind of coming wide open. And I said, no, I'm not concerned about it, because I think part of the reason is they were getting schemed open, right? They were running concepts that were going to clear guys up to get guys open. And that's what I've been calling for. So I would somewhat disagree with that. And say that they are making changes. Mike Huff says, I think Colsey can be special. I agree. But he's got to get developed, right? You see that, Mike. Jordan Johnson could have been special. Xavier Watts could be special. There's guys that could be special, but you've got to coach them up. And I think that, to me, is more of the problem. Let's see here. This is a great response, Liam. Need the bat signal to be illuminated to calm everyone down. I agree completely. As we kind of wrap things up, I think that's a great a great response. Yes, that would be a nice way to kind of calm things down, right? It's for the bat signal to get thrown up. If I knew of a couple guys that were silent commits, that hey, is any chance we could speed this up? We could use some good news today because people are losing their minds, which tends to happen. Angela Morgan says Jordan Johnson to transfer where? Angela, I'm not sure where he's going to transfer right now. I just know he's leaving Notre Dame. I imagine there's going to be a lot of schools that are going to be looking for him and looking at him. I'm not sure where he's going. And then Mark 1 says, we'll wrap up with this. Every year it's something like this. I grew up in South Bend during the old days. I don't remember all of this happening. Era, Lou, and Divine. So Lou definitely had guys transfer. I mean, Lou had guys transfers that played. I believe Arnold Ollie transferred after his freshman year. Kent Graham transferred out. Dorsey Levens, I believe. Wasn't Dorsey one of the running back under Lou that transferred out? Maybe, maybe not. He was maybe right before. But they had guys leave. And I don't know about Era and Divine because, I mean, I was a baby when Dan Divine left Notre Dame. I think I was like 3 years old. So I couldn't tell you why that is the case. I just know the game is different. I mean, it's just a different era. Kids are different. Kids are different than when I coached. I was different than the kids I coached. And I wasn't even that much older than a lot of the kids that I coached. And different parts of the country have different attitudes and different expectations. I mean, look, transfers are going to happen. And especially as we kind of got in the last decade, transfers are more and more likely to happen. But I mean, this kind of stuff happens. It happened under Lou. It's transfers are going to happen. And I don't actually, sometimes transfers can be a good thing. When Kendall Adler-Rahman transferred, I didn't bang Notre Dame for it because I understood the circumstance and I understood that he was buried behind a lot of other good players. It's to me and I'm not even really upset that Jordan Johnson transferred. It's the reasons why he transferred. If I felt like Jordan Johnson just got beat out by better players, I could live with that. But unfortunately, I don't think that's the case. And that's what makes this so frustrating. So every situation is different. It's just the game has changed. Kids, it's just a different era. And so that's why I don't think it's fair to say, well, this never happened during the era or Divine years. I don't know if it did or didn't, but it's just those are not eras we should contend with. And to me, Lou Holtz did have transfers. And Lou Holtz, I know for a fact, I mean, I just pointed at least one of them, had guys that transferred that were players. I mean, we talked about this. He had guys kicked out of school. I mean, that stuff's going to happen. All right, Jay Clampett Investments. I think this is the main criticism of BK since the beginning. Keeps ineffective coaches 2 years too long and an unwillingness to young playmakers on the field. There's a lot to that. There's a lot to that. Mule Skinner, I haven't agreed with a lot of your comments in the podcast today, but this is funny. The Bears fans are losing their minds since they finally have a franchise quarterback. Yes, they do. So they got it. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay. This could be a benefit to recruiting if the right lessons are learned. That's good. Yeah, and Tommy, I think at the end of the day, that's the key. Jordan Johnson has lessons he needs to learn from this. Del Alexander has lessons he needs to learn from this. Brian Kelly has lessons he needs to learn from this. And I think everybody involved needs to take some level of accountability and make sure that it doesn't happen again. Jordan needs to make sure that he, understands what got him in Brian Kelly's doghouse to begin with, and then make sure that he doesn't do those things wherever he goes, right? And sometimes a fresh start is good for kids, and it is. Sometimes it ends up not working out for you. But I think everybody needs to take a lesson from this. And if that happens, and this makes them stronger down the road, it'll not only help recruiting, Tommy, it'll help the entire operation. So that is it for today's show. I appreciate everybody being here with us. It's been a long 2 hours, but I wanted to try to make sure that everybody's at least the main themes of what people are dealing with and are thinking today got heard. That's kind of what I want our channel to be about, is not for me to just share my opinion all the time, but for you people to share your opinions as well. And be able to kind of have a platform to speak your minds and share your thoughts and feelings on Notre Dame football. And that's what I really enjoy about this channel, even on today's like today, where it's not great news and there is people understandably upset. I think this is good for us to be able to talk things through. Hey, maybe we're overreacting here. Maybe we're not reacting as strongly enough over here, but it's fun. And I'm really happy. I appreciate all of y'all. There were a lot of debate and discussion and back and forth, but there was a lot of respect being shown, and people can agree to disagree. We can have different opinions on things. I can think Brian Kelly did a bad job. You think Brian Kelly can do a good job, and we can all do it respectfully towards each other. There wasn't some respect from some people towards Coach Kelly or Coach Alexander, but towards each other as Notre Dame fans, that is very much appreciated. So we went 2 hours, and I didn't have to kick anybody out of the chat. Nobody was arguing, no name calling. This was awesome. I really appreciate that. I love this community. I can't wait to grow this community. I'm having a ton of fun with it. So appreciate everybody being part of the show. Appreciate Jacob Dunn giving us a super chat. That's much, much appreciated. Certainly helps us out. And appreciate everybody taking time out of your day to listen to our show. Appreciate everybody sticking with us. Our numbers have been great throughout the show. And make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and the notification bell. So that way when we do live shows, because what I try to do is give it at least an hour or two of a heads up of when we're going to go live. If you hit the notification bell, you'll get an email and you'll get notified on YouTube that we are going live. And you can join us. And of course, as you always know, we'll get to sessions where you'll get a chance to get your opinion heard, which is why our shows tend to go so long, because I want to make sure that if you take the time to be part of our show, that you get a chance to have your voice get heard. And we'll always try to do that, especially on times like today when we have a little bit more extra time. So appreciate it, everybody. Have an awesome rest of your day. Make sure you're checking out irishbreakdown.com. I have a commitment roundup of Eli Raridan. We have our podcast where we break down the commitment of Eli Raridan on there. I have a early look at the 2022 draft. Talk about Kyle Hamilton, Kyron Williams, some other guys that I think could be potential 2022 draft picks. So that's up on the site right now. Eric Rudder's got several recruiting stories up that I'm going to be putting up today and tomorrow. And I'm finishing up my outside receivers big board. Will be up very soon. So I'm going to break down and rank the outside receivers, which is a pretty appropriate time to do this. So make sure you're also checking out irishbreakdown.com. So everybody have a great rest of your day. Appreciate you all being with us, and we will talk to you again very soon.